Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to Room for Doubt at IUPUI. My name is Nicholas Tedla. I work with an apologetics-focused campus ministry, Ratio Christi, and we, along with many other fabulous campus ministries, are incredibly excited. We're thrilled to have Dr. Turek with us today. And if you want to find out more about Ratio and others, there's tables back there on the left. We would like to remind those of you in attendance that this event is being filmed. So if you have any issues being filmed, now mind you, it's Dr. Turek that is the focus. But for things like Q&A, for example, if you have any qualms about that, do bear that in mind. So what we hope for those of you here in attendance or listening from home or wherever you are is a deep respect for both faith and reason, which are both essential to any discipline of thought, and that is our contention, that is our belief, and that is certainly Dr. Turek's belief. To make the initial pitch, I know you're here to listen to Dr. Turek, but I'll give you a little initial pitch. I'll briefly discuss Nicholas Copernicus. Probably most of you have heard him, and I admire him not only because me and him share the same first name, but but because also he did something that not many of us are willing to do. He controverted the prevailing consensus of learned men and also of evidence to propose that it wasn't the sun that moved, but it was the earth, right? So that's remarkable, and I think Galileo pretty clearly saw that. To quote, he said, there is no limit to my astonishment when I reflect that Aristarchus, who was an ancient Greek philosopher and astronomer, and Copernicus were able to make reason so conquer sense that in defiance of the latter, the former became mistress of their belief. In other words, the reason overpowered what their senses were telling them. But then why trust reason? What good actually is reason? How do we know human reason has any ability to guide us to truth? Well, Galileo also wrote in a letter to the Grand Duchess Christina of Lorraine, I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use and by some other means to give us knowledge, which we can attain by them. In other words, their faith that the universe was created by a God who had a rational intellect, he created creatures that are inquisitive and also share in that same rational intellect, could access the things contained in that ordered universe. So, you'll get a fuller expounding of this and a lot more from Dr. Turek, but that's the idea. So, and finally, I would like to say, so thank Copernicus and his faith, thank Galileo and his faith, because that's what gives us heliocentrism, the belief that the sun is the center of our solar system. So, and with that with that out of the way, I'll give you a brief rundown of the itinerary for the evening. It'll be a approximately 2-hour talk by Dr. Turek. Following that, we'll have a 30-minute Q&A session. So we'll have a mic up for people to come down to, and I'll brief you on that when we actually approach that part of the evening. And with that said, I'm sure a lot of you know Dr. Turek and are excited to listen to him. If you would please join me in welcoming Dr. Frank Turek.
Thanks, Nick. Well, good evening, Jaguars. Are there Boilermakers here, or are there Hoosiers here? Yeah. You guys don't like the mix, the Jaguar mix, huh? All right. Well, let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has 2 Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, But if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward, chest first, onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's High School in Garden Grove, California built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, Zumwalt class. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. "There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends," said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, many people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people tend to embellish things. And it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. How many people in this room, or even watching out there on the internet, have seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for at least 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty groovin' music, isn't it? Yeah, that's actually from our TV show on every Wednesday nights on DirecTV channel 378. Anybody with DirecTV in here? DirecTV. One guy! Come on, friends, don't let friends watch cable. If you want to get, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, you got to get DirecTV. Actually, that's not true. How many have Roku? Roku? All right, look. Okay, Roku. Look for NRB TV on Roku, National Religious Broadcasters, because it's on that station. If you don't have DirecTV, you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping Indianapolis right now. It's called the internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, it's actually broadcast, streamed on our website. You can check it out. We're also on radio every Saturday morning. Now, I know if you're a college student, you don't get up until the crack of noon on Saturday, but that's okay. This is podcast. You can listen to it anytime you want. It's called the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. What we do is we present evidence for Christianity and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. This is going to serve as our outline here tonight. We're going to go through these 4 questions, and then if I time this just right, we'll have absolutely no time for your questions. No, we'll have plenty of time for questions later. All right, first question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people saying there's no truth, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. If there's no truth, Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either. Now, of course, there's truth, ladies and gentlemen. Would you be spending thousands of dollars a year to come to, do you guys still call it IUPUI? IUPUI. Yeah! I get scolded sometimes when I say that, but you like that. All right, good. Yeah, why would you spend thousands of dollars a year to come here if there's no truth? Right? You're here to learn truth, I assume. And by the way, if there was no truth, could you ever catch someone in a lie? I mean, lies presuppose truth, don't they? Otherwise, you couldn't catch anyone in a lie if there was no truth. We're going to get to that first. Second question, does God exist? We hope to see tonight, through 3 arguments, that God really exists. These arguments are in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, you can establish that God exists without any reference to any religious work. Before there was a Bible, people knew there was a God. Third, are miracles possible? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible, and we don't seem to see many miracles anymore, if any. Yet I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting the evidence for this miracle. We'll see it here tonight. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we want to see if the New Testament documents are reliable enough. They don't have to be an errant to know this. And you're not assuming they're inspired or inerrant. We just want to see if they have good historical information in them. About one particular event, critical to Christianity. What is the event? Anyone? The resurrection, right? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, Christianity is false, as the Apostle Paul himself said to the church at Corinth, his first letter, chapter 15. Your faith is in vain if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead. You realize Christianity is a religious worldview you can investigate to discover whether or not it's true? It's just not someone's philosophy. You can look at information, you can look at data, you can look at evidence and see if it's really true. Now, from this point, as we unpack in the book, I think you can show that the entire Bible is true. You say, how so? Because look, if Jesus predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, then he's God. And whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the Old Testament as the Word of God, and he promised the New Testament. You say, well, why trust Jesus? Look, I just have a personal policy. If somebody predicts and accomplishes his own resurrection from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says. All right? That's the bottom line. Now, we're going to start right here. Does truth exist? You guys ready to go? Yeah. 2 guys in the front. Are you guys ready to go? Yeah. All right. Now, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, oh, man. Jaguars. That could have been the lamest you can't handle the truth in the history of this seminar. There's no way he said it like that. If he said it like that, you can't handle the truth, the movie would have gone nowhere. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try that again. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't you always want to do that with some professor? You know, just yell out, you can't handle the truth. Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, if you don't get anything outside of what we talk about here tonight, these next few minutes, for me anyway, are the most important, this is the most important thinking skill I've ever learned. I was 33 years old, I already had a master's degree, and I did not know what I'm about to tell you right now, to show you what a dimwit I was. And all I'm doing here in the next few minutes is to apply some laws of logic, particularly the law of non-contradiction, which says opposite ideas cannot be both true at the same time and in the same sense. How many people in here have ever had a course in logic? Can I see your hands, please? You see these people? These are the homeschoolers. See these people right here? Okay. If we taught logic in public school, it'd be much better. Now, this thinking skill will help you discover what is false, which is important. Why? Because if you start believing and living by false principles, eventually you're going to smack up against reality and it's going to hurt. This thinking skill will help you discover what is false. And so many statements in our culture, so many mantras, so many slogans are just false because they violate the law of non-contradiction. And the easiest way of showing you this thinking skill is to give you an example of using it. If someone were to say to you, there is no truth, this is a postmodern relativistic claim, what question would you ask them? Yeah, if somebody says there's no truth, you want to say, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can everybody see this is a self-defeating statement? What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction. A self-defeating statement doesn't meet its own standard. A self-defeating statement would be like me saying I can't speak a word in English. What would you say if I said that? Yeah, you just used English to say it. Or it would be like saying my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child. Or everything I say is a lie. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that one, all right? Now, these self-defeating statements you can detect by doing one thing, turning the claim on itself. This is the thinking skill. When somebody says something, you want to turn the claim on itself to see if it meets its own standard, to see if it's consistent, or to see if it violates the law of non-contradiction. All right, let's do a few more of these. Suppose someone were to say, there's no such thing as absolute truth. If you turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask them? Yeah, is that an absolute truth? Or you might say, are you absolutely sure there are no such things as absolute truths? Because that's an absolute truth statement. Can everybody see this is an absolute truth, claiming there are no such thing as absolute truths? It defeats itself. Now, in our culture, it's not said this way much anymore. It's probably said more often now, say in the past, say 5 or so years, like this. There isn't the truth, only my truth. Look, you got your truth, I got my truth. You live your truth, I live my truth. We'll all get along, right? Sounds so right. Sounds like we all ought to believe this. It sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? Sounds like this is the way you ought to live. There's just one big problem with it. It's logically self-defeating. Why? Because if somebody says, there isn't the truth, only my truth, you just want to ask them, is that just your truth or the truth? Because if you're claiming this statement up here is just your truth, in other words, it's just your opinion, well, then why should I believe it? But if you're saying this statement up here is the truth, well, the first half of the statement says there are no such thing as the truths. Can everyone see this is a the truth statement, claiming there are no such thing as the truth statements? Again, it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Now, I know it's very unpopular in our culture to say this, particularly on a college campus, but there's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just the truth. I mean, if you're going to say you have your own truth, you might as well say I have my own math. Imagine if Andy over here, who helped organize this with Ratio Christie, said, hey, Frank, after this seminar is over, I want you to hang around my house tomorrow to help me with a few things. I'll pay you $10 an hour. However many hours you work, I'll pay you. You just let me know. And so I decided to do it. And actually, Andy would never do this. He doesn't pay that much. Anyway, but let's suppose I go over his house tomorrow and I work for 15 hours. And he goes, okay, what do I owe you? And I go, let's see, $10 an hour at $15 an hour. You owe me $150,000. He's going to go, no, I don't. I owe you $150,000. Suppose I were to say to him, oh, no, you don't understand, Andy. I have my own math. What's he going to say? You're crazy. There's not my math or your math. There's just math. There's not my truth or your truth. There's just truth. And until we realize that, a lot of people are going to suffer because they're trying to live their truth, and their truth's going to take them down a very painful path. Now, sometimes it isn't said this way. It's often said this way. It's true for you, but not for me. Well, Christianity may be true for you, but Buddhism's true for me. What do you say to that? This is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, say, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you, but not for me, true for everybody? Because if true for you, but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you, but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know this can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because it's self-defeating. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, say, sure, go try that with your bank teller. Yeah, go to your bank teller and say, look, economy is down, inflation's up, I need some extra money. I'd like $100,000 out of my account. The bank teller looks at your account and says, I'm sorry, I only have $6.12 in your account. It's easy to get the money. You simply say, ha, that's true for you, but not for me. Give me the 100 grand. Are you going to get the money? No, if it's true there was only $6.12 in your account, that's true for all people at all times in all places when referring to you at that time. It's just true. And by the way, if God exists and Jesus rose from the dead, that's true whether you believe it or not. Of course, if God doesn't exist or Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then believing it isn't going to make it true either, is it? It's false. Actually, I ask a lot of Christians, do you think Christianity is true? Of course they say yes, and then I ask them why. Do you know what answer I get more than any other? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith, your psychological state, change whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead? No, your faith doesn't change a thing about those things. Either God exists or He doesn't, regardless of what you believe about it. I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? You have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground. Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, why is the Bible always talking about faith then? Because there's two kinds of faith. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Very important distinction. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the Bible's telling the truth. That's what we call apologetics. Doesn't mean we're saying we're sorry. It means we're giving evidence that something is actually the case. But all the belief that in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. For that, you got to go from belief that to belief in. There's a difference. See, belief that is just of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, it's of the heart. In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called, You Guys Are Sharp Tonight. James says, even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Do you realize that if God exists, and He does, and if demons exist, and they do, that demons know that God exists better than we do? Yeah, but they don't trust in Him. Well, they don't want to trust in Him. They don't have to. They have a choice, and so do we. In fact, we know the difference between belief that and belief in relationships. When I first met my wife 37 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between belief that and belief in. One is of the head, the other is of the head of the heart. Now, most of the time when the Bible's talking about faith, it's talking about the second kind. After you know that Jesus is the Savior, trust in Him. Now, you don't have to if you don't want to. If you don't want to trust in Him, God is not going to force you into heaven against your will. He gives you that choice. And by the way, faith is not blind. Faith is not, I have no evidence, I'm just going to believe anyway. Faith is trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. Trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. Now, you'll probably hear this quite a bit, particularly at the university. There is no truth in anything but science. What's the problem with the claim? Turn the claim on itself. Anyone? This is the interactive portion of the program. Come on. What would you say? What question would you ask? Yes, is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that claim? No, that's a philosophical claim. That's not a statement of science. That's a statement about science. And you can't do science without philosophy. Science is built on philosophy. In fact, every endeavor here at this university is built on philosophy. When you get a PhD, what does the PhD stand for? Not phenomenally dumb. It stands for philosophy of history, physics, biology, whatever. You can't understand the Bible without philosophy, which is right thinking about reality. In fact, there's a book over there called Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. And there's a chapter in there on science. Here's the title of the chapter. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. Why do I say that? Because all data needs to be gathered and all data needs to be interpreted. And who does that? Scientists do that. And sometimes scientists disagree. You ever wonder why you get conflicting advice on COVID? You say, follow the science. Well, which science? Whose science? Look, if scientists have good data and they interpret it properly, you'll get good advice. If they got good data, don't interpret it properly, you'll get bad advice. If they got bad data, it doesn't matter how they interpret it, you'll get bad advice. If there's a political agenda, oh, that'll never happen. Why do we think that scientists are immune to the three great temptations the rest of us are not immune to? What are the three great temptations that can cause us to do immoral things? Sex, money, and power. Why? Because those things are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. I submit to you that if you follow the money and you follow the power, you have your answer as to why we've had such conflicting information on COVID. Also, when you have some scientists saying, you need to censor these other scientists, you know what's probably going on here? The people who are trying to censor the other people are probably lying. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, isn't it? Why don't you just let everybody say what they want to say, and we can sort through the evidence ourselves? So science doesn't say a word. By the way, this is also why you have disagreement over how we got here. Many scientists will say we got here through some evolutionary process. Other scientists will say, no, it looks like intelligence was involved. Why do they come to different conclusions? They're all looking at evidence. Well, one reason might be because if you're open to intelligent causes, you're open to intelligent causes or natural causes. Those are the only two types of causes. But if you're atheistic, you might rule out intelligent causes before you look at the evidence. Is it any wonder, if you do that, why you always have to conclude it's a natural cause? You've ruled out the only other possible type of cause before you even looked at the evidence. Is that a result of the science or a result of the philosophy behind the science? Now, maybe they're right. Maybe it is a natural cause. But you kind of stack the deck when you take out the only other possibility, don't you? And by the way, as important as science is, it makes our lives better, longer. It's great, but science isn't the most important thing in life. Honey, do you love me? Yeah, why? I don't know, let's run an experiment. No, that's not the way life really works. There's a lot more important things than science. How about this? You're going to hear this too. You ought not judge. In fact, if you're a Christian, why are you judging? Because Jesus said don't judge. You hypocrite. All right, let's leave Jesus aside for just a second. What's the problem logically with this claim? Yeah, if somebody says you ought not judge, if you turn the claim on itself, you're going to say, hey, isn't that a judgment? Or if they start judging, they say you ought not judge. You might want to say, then why are you judging me for judging? You say, wait a minute, didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Sure he did, Frank. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. This is his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. It's right there. All right. I know this is going to sound odd for a second, but stick with me. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. You think when Matthew was writing his biography, which we now call a gospel, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1. No, when were the chapter and verse divisions put in? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is really important, right? Because if you didn't have numbers in this thing, it'd be really hard to find your way around. Imagine you didn't have numbers in your Bible and you went to church one Sunday and the pastor had a big Bible up there without numbers in it and he said, let's go about 2/3 of the way in, let's see if we can find the same spot, right? No, you wouldn't be able to do that, right? You need numbers to find your way around. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. We can't do that. In fact, some of you are going to hate me for this, but I'm leaving in the morning, so I don't care. This is why you should never say that Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you. You know Jeremiah 29:11. Oh, the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, plans to give you hope in a future 70 years from now. That's on pillows, that's on posters, that's on coffee mugs, that's on birthday cards, that's everywhere. Is that a promise to 21st century Christians? No, what's the context of that passage? God is writing a letter through Jeremiah to the exiles who were taken out of Judah and brought to Babylon in 586 BC. And he's saying, look, 70 years from now I'm going to prosper you. You just stay there and you seek the welfare of the community. But don't worry, 70 years from now I'm going to prosper you and bring you home. Okay? It's not a promise to us. I always ask people that say that's a promise to us today. Why don't you claim Jeremiah 44:11 as a promise to you? Why? What's Jeremiah 44:11? That's what God said he was going to do to the exiles that went to Egypt in 586 BC. He didn't want them to go to Egypt. You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? I will destroy you in all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. You don't see that on a birthday card, happy birthday. I will destroy you in all Judah. That is so sweet, Grandma. Thank you so much. No. We're taking stuff out of context. Same thing is true with Matthew 7:1. He doesn't say, judge not, and he stops right there. What does he say? He says, judge not, lest you be judged by the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, which is a judgment, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. And then he goes on to say, don't cast your pearls before swine, which is another judgment, right? Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. Don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. It would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Because number one, it's a judgment itself. And number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments today just getting over here. Safe choices from unsafe choices. Now you're going, this was a really bad choice. I shouldn't be here. This guy's crazy, all right? Everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. There's no God. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Bible's not telling the truth. There's no objective meaning to life. There's no hope. You just die, become worm food. That's it. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, though. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees? What was their job? They were the teachers and religious and political leaders of Israel. You see, Rome, who was in power at the time, delegated much of the day-to-day political and lawmaking authority to the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council. And Pharisees were on that council. They were the politicians. And Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And when he went after these people, he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. Sweet and gentle Jesus did this? Yes! And then in John chapter 8, he's having an argument with these Pharisees. He's right in the middle of the argument with them when he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ. Can you imagine you're having an argument with somebody and you stop right in the middle and you go, your father is the devil. Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus really goes off on these people when he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. Have you ever heard anybody preach on those verses? Yet if you're a Christian in this room, you know those verses are true because some of you are divided in your own family over Jesus. Who are you going to follow, me or the culture? Says Jesus. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. You ever notice when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? if you say to your best friend, I really love you, you're such a wonderful person, I wish I could be like you. You think your friend's going to say, well, who are you to judge? You think you're worse than me? No, your friend's never going to say that. See, I've noticed that people don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. In fact, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get upset with you, you just helped convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. For you military people in here, and by the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for never again volunteer yourself. For you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. As Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. So we have to make judgments, but we have to make judgments without being judgmental. If you're a Christian, you're not going to get to heaven because you're better than anyone else. The only way you're getting to heaven is because Jesus was better than everybody else. He was perfect, and you put your trust in Him. In fact, somebody said it this way, evangelism is just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. So we have to make judgments, but we have to make judgments without being judgmental. Now, we could spend much more time on this, but we don't have it because there's so many more self-defeating statements. All I want to do at this point is sum it all up this way. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? Which means relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there's no such thing as truth. And tragically, most of our universities and many of our high schools have bought into the truth that there is no truth. Well, why am I paying thousands of dollars a year to learn that? It's self-defeating. Now, a little bit later, we'll have the microphone set up for Q&A. This is actually one of our events at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And there, they love the Bible about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And I may, if you're not a Christian and you ask a question, I may ask you a question, but it's not fair for me to do that unless I warn you in advance. So I'm going to tell you right now, here's the question I might ask you at the microphone. And it's a question that if you are a Christian, I think you should ask of other people you'd like to be a Christian. Here's the question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no! No. How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God of their own lives. And most of the time I do too. Don't you? Our biggest problem is we want to be God. Many of us are not on a truth quest. We're on a happiness quest. And we're just going to believe whatever we think is going to make us, whatever's going to make us happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun but selfish things, yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in this room over 40 years old know what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves. If you want to get contentment, you've got to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. So always ask people, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If the person hesitates or says no, it's not a head problem. It's a heart problem. They don't want it to be true. Now, an atheist could ask, well, if atheism were true, would you become an atheist? Fair question. Are we just believing something because we like it or we're used to it? Or are we believing it because it's really true? Eternity might depend on this. You know that? So truth does exist. You can't get away from it. To deny it is to actually make a truth claim. Actually, you can get away from it temporarily. How do you get away from it? You suppress it to go your own way. This is what Paul talks about in his letter to the Romans. We suppress the truth and unrighteousness to go our own way. We want to do this, but God says go this way, and we don't like that. But how do we even know it's true that God exists? That's the second question. So let's get into that. I mentioned 3 arguments. Here are the 3 arguments. There's more arguments for God than this, but we have limited time. The first argument is the argument from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And if there's design in the universe and design in life, there must be a designer. Now, before I go any further, I want to tell you at the end of this, I'm going to give you this entire PowerPoint presentation. So if any of you want to remember any of this later, you don't have to write anything down. I'm going to send it to you, okay? Anyway, the third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument you all have known since you were very small children. You've known this intuitively. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says that there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one. Like it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust. Or it's wrong to go into an elementary school and shoot 9-year-olds. There has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, then everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against some child murderer's opinion. We know that murder isn't just a matter of opinion. If that's the case, there must be an external standard to us, a standard of righteousness and goodness and justice that we're obligated to obey. If that standard doesn't exist, then everything's a matter of opinion. Yet we know it does. Anyway, we'll get to that argument later. Let's start with the cosmological argument. You got to admit, it was worth coming out here tonight just to see God do that. Right? Some of you have said, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there's some Christians in here going, Frank, we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists have admitted it. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 6 years ago. As you know, Hawking was kind of a medical miracle. He had ALS for like 40 years. Normally, ALS will kill you in 2 years. He kept going. And he was probably the best-known physicist in the world when he died. An atheist, but here's what he said. Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God for the beginning. He failed, but he's admitting the data. Space, time, and matter literally came into existence out of nothing. And there's a lot of scientific evidence for this. We're not going to look into it now. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. And number three, it's not controversial. Even atheists are admitting the universe had a beginning. What is controversial is what caused it. Before we get there, I want to show you one piece of philosophical evidence that the universe did have a beginning. You don't even need science to know the universe had a beginning. Here is a timeline. Let's say we don't know how far back this timeline goes. Here's today, the present. There's yesterday. There's the day before yesterday. There's last week. Here's my question. Can this timeline here be infinite into the past? Why not? Why can it not be infinite into the past? Because if there were an infinite number of days before today, this day, today, never would have gotten here. Because you'd always have to live another day before you got to today, if there's an infinite number of days, right? But today is here, which means what? There can only be a finite number of days before today, which means time had a beginning. And if time had a beginning, what could have created time? Something that's timeless. And if you're timeless, do you personally have a beginning? No. You don't have a beginning. You're the uncaused first cause. In fact, that's where we're going with this. Let's go right to the bottom line. If the past were infinite, today never would have arrived. Here's the bottom line. If the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us with one of two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Someone. I think so, right? I know some atheists, though, are saying no one created something out of nothing. Well, look. Number two says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. By the way, do you know that everyone believes in at least one miracle? Christians believe in this miracle and many others, but atheists believe in one miracle. Some of them will say, yep, no one created something out of nothing. Which miracle takes more faith? Yeah, one takes a lot more faith. Blind faith. If you're going to say that something can arise without a cause, then you've just defeated all science, because what is science? Science is a search for causes. You're trying to find cause and effect. If you're going to deny the law of causality, you've just given up on science. In fact, here's a question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? Why does anything exist if there's no God? If there's no uncaused first cause? Now, ladies and gentlemen, if space-time and matter had a beginning, what could have caused space-time and matter to have a beginning? Seems to me it has to be something outside of space-time and matter, something that transcends space-time and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Also, the cause would have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet. We haven't done enough research yet. This could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God at this point. We don't know if this is Jesus yet. In order to figure out if this is the Christian God, we got to go through the rest of those questions. And if we do discover that Jesus rose from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,990 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We haven't gotten there yet, but we have 6 attributes of the first cause, which looks like it could be the God of the Bible, and we haven't opened the Bible yet. All right, second argument for God. We'll spend a little bit more time on this. This is a fascinating argument. In fact, many atheists will admit this is the best argument for God, one that they can't really deal with. It's the design argument. And there are 2 aspects to it. The universe appears designed, and you appear to be designed. Let's look at the universe first. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is fine-tuned for life. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe, virtually imperceptibly, there would either be no universe or a universe that couldn't support life. And even Stephen Hawking admitted this, the atheist again. Here's what he said. This is just one of these aspects of our universe, factors about our universe. He said, if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary explanation for this. Why? Because the expansion rate did not evolve to a particular point by chance, whatever that means. It started there. In other words, it seems to me the same being that created space, time, and matter is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be at the very beginning. This is one of the initial conditions of the universe. Also, right now, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 in 10 to the 40th power compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't be here. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. Stack the entire North American continent in dimes all the way to the moon. That's like 238,000 miles. And then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. Stack it in dimes to the moon. Take all those dimes, put them in one big pile, mark 1 dime red, mix it in, blindfold a friend, throw him on the pile, tell him to pick one at random. The chances he will pick that 1 red dime are 1 chance, 1 part in 10 to the 40th power. Is he going to pick that dime? No, he's not. Look, there's only 2 possibilities for the cause of this. Either it was designed to be like it is, or it wasn't. What makes more sense? Design, obviously. You say, maybe chance did it. Ladies and gentlemen, is chance a cause? Does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance, he was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. Chance doesn't do a thing. You know what scientists mean when they use the word chance? We don't know. Now, these are just two of probably a dozen of these. Change any one of them, the universe doesn't exist. Or it can't support life, or both. But also our solar system appears to be designed with us in mind. Let's take a look at the solar system here. Here we are, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to, a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it is... That's a lie, it's way too cold here in the winter. Axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours, change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us, change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Yeah, its gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these purple marks are? Those are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Saturn does the same thing. In fact, you want to see the size of the planets? Check this out. Here they are. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? What then? You bigots. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus, another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun. Jupiter, 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus. Where's Arcturus now? Way over here, right of Regal. That's Antares, another star in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy, in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here would be... Look, I don't name the stars, all right? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And that's just in our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. It'll take you at least 2 tanks of gas on a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. You remember when we had a space shuttle that went around the Earth? You remember those days? You know, when the space shuttle was in orbit around the Earth, it was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. Right? You'll be 5 miles a second. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take us? A long time. Yeah, you must be a math major. Yeah. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years, you would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. You know, it took us 9 years to get to Pluto. 9 years. Think about this. If our solar system was the size of a quarter with the sun at the center and Pluto on the outer rim, you know where the next nearest star is? It's 2 football fields away. The heavens are awesome. In fact, even if we could go light speed, 186,000 miles per second, it would take you almost 4 years to get to the next nearest star. And that's just in our galaxy. Now notice what the psalmist says about the heavens and God's love. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. How high are the heavens above the earth? I mean, if it's going to take us 200,000 years at 5 miles a second just to go between stars in our galaxy, how many stars are out there? Well, the Hubble Space Telescope has helped us discover that. About 20 years ago, they trained the Hubble Space Telescope on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. I don't know if you can see this along the bottom of this slide, but you see down here, these are mountains right here. See that? This is the southern hemisphere. I'm going to show you the film they put together as a result of Hubble Ultra Deep Field. When I start this thing, you're going to see the constellations come up, and then Hubble is going to zoom out to 1/26 millionth of the sky. There is no audio. It's just video, very short. You guys ready? Okay, here we go. Hubble Ultra Deep Field. There are the constellations. Now let's go see what they found. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky. Each of these galaxies allegedly have billions of stars of their own. If you find 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky, how many stars are there in the entire universe? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000. And to go from one star to another star just in our galaxy going 5 miles a second will take you over 200,000 years. Now you know why the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. But this is a problem. Why? Because if this is supposed to represent visually an idea of what God is like, and it is, this means every one of his attributes is infinite, including his justice. And that's a problem for me and a problem for you. Why? Because we've been unjust. And if he's infinitely just, he can't allow us to go unpunished. Otherwise, he wouldn't be infinitely just. So what's the solution? Here's the second half of that verse I showed you a minute ago. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Yes, he's infinitely just, but he's also infinitely loving. So how does he allow unjust people to go unpunished? He adds humanity to his deity. He comes into this space-time continuum and allows those unjust creatures that he created to torture and kill him so he could take their punishment on himself. This is why Jesus is the only way, ladies and gentlemen. It's not an arbitrary claim. It's not God just saying, "Oh, I just said so." No, Jesus is the only way because there's no other way an infinitely just God can allow unjust people like you and me to go unpunished unless an innocent substitute takes our punishment. And that's what happens. That's why Paul writes in his letter to the Romans, chapter 3, verse 26, God remains just, and he's the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Now, when you look out there and you see stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and it'll take you 200,000 years at 5 miles a second to go between them, does that make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because as amazing as the heavens are, they're not made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, the heavens were made for you. And here's the second aspect of the teleological argument. You're designed. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? Human. In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. Okay? When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race, and you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. That's right, you can give yourselves a hand, of course. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.5 billion letter genome, your software program, your DNA, all the letters in the right order. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.5 billion letter genome, your software program, your DNA, that makes you you. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this, friends. This was a subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? And when someone says, well, don't impose your morals on me, I say, why not? Would that be immoral? See, because you're imposing your morals on me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought-nots. Why do you get to impose ought-nots, but I don't? Actually, the better answer is this. When somebody says, don't impose your morals on me, I think you ought to say, these aren't my morals. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that rape is wrong, that abortion's wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. So look, if you've got a problem with demorality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others lung cells, others heart cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. Knock it off. I mean, are you thinking about this? Are you going, wait a minute, Frank, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How is it happening? Well, Aristotle noticed something 2,400 years ago. He didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature's going in a direction. For example, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree, or a birch tree, or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And is an acorn in the ground conscious? Is an acorn thinking, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. But if it's properly nourished, it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, and it doesn't, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward that end. This is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and he said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God, that all of nature's going in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there must be somebody directing it. This is why we can do science, ladies and gentlemen, because nature's orderly. It goes in a direction. It's reliable cause and effect. Now notice, this is not a Big Bang cause way back when. That's another argument. This cause is a cause right now, a vertical cause. Every single second the universe exists, this mind, which created the universe and created the natural laws and created you, is keeping all of that going. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing the music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music. What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music would be over, right? Same thing is true with God. Creates the universe, creates the natural laws that govern it, and creates you, and He sustains the universe, the natural laws that govern it, and He sustains you every single second. This is why the Apostle Paul could come along and say, in Him we live and move and have our being. And Jesus holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by His powerful word. So this is a right now cause. And it seems to me, without this, the universe would be chaotic if it existed at all, and we wouldn't exist either. Now, there's a lot more in the Stealing from God book, but we got to do one more argument for God, and that is the moral argument. Now, in order to get into this argument, I want to ask you guys a question. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's when he throws it to the other team and they take it back for a touchdown for themselves. How do you know that? Guys, he's talking about football. Come on! Not just the rules. You got to know more than the rules. What do you have to know to say that a touchdown's better than a pick six? What do you have to know? Huh? You got to know the purpose. That's right. This gentleman from the Marine Corps, hoorah, right here. You got to know the purpose of the game. Only if you know the purpose can you say a touchdown gets us closer to the purpose, whereby a pick six takes us further away. Now, notice in football that the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When the Eagles and the Chiefs played a couple of months ago down in Glendale, Arizona, they showed up. The field's already set. The refs are waiting. They didn't set up the rules. Who set up the rules? Well, the commissioner and the owners, and every once in a while they tweak the rules a little bit. The rules come from outside the game. Now, in football, the rules of the game are arbitrary. They could be different. But in life, the rules are not arbitrary. They come from outside the game, but they come from the creator of the game. They come from God. If there is no God, there's no purpose. And if there's no purpose, there's no right way to live life or no wrong way to live life. In fact, if there is no God, the Nazis were not wrong. Because there's no standard beyond countries to say the Nazis were wrong and the Allies were right. If there is no God, love is no better than rape. Oh, you might like love better, but that's just your preference. If there is no God, there are no human rights. It seems like in our country we invent rights every 10 minutes. You notice this? Do you realize there are no rights unless God exists? It's just your opinion. Not only, even on the most controversial issues, people say they have a right to an abortion. Do you know there's no right to an abortion if there's no God? In fact, there's no right to life if there's no God. People say they have trans rights. There are no trans rights if there's no God. In fact, there's no any other rights if there's no God. There's no right to same-sex marriage. There's no right to natural marriage. It's all a matter of opinion. And if you notice, there's only two ways to govern people. You can govern people through principle, in other words, the truth, or you can govern people through power. You notice what's going on right now? People want to govern one another not by principle. They don't want to debate these issues. They want to cancel the debate. They want to shut you up if you disagree. That's trying to impose power on people rather than to govern by principle. Well, if there is no God, there are no principles. It's a free-for-all. We're nothing but overgrown monkeys fighting for the control of the banana supply if there's no God. In fact, if there's no God, murder, slavery, and racism are not wrong. But we all know these things are wrong. So there must be a God. If there's no God, religious people have never done anything wrong. For you Christians in here, how many times have people called you a hypocrite? You know what you ought to say when they say that? You're right. But why is hypocrisy wrong? It's only wrong if there's a God. Otherwise, it's just your opinion. And by the way, if I was perfect, I wouldn't need a Savior. Of course I'm a hypocrite. How many people in here, by the way, it might be you or somebody you know, are not a Christian because some other Christian wronged you, was a jerk to you? Can I see your hands, please? You know somebody like this, or it might even be you. Historian John Dixon asks you to ask this question of people who are not Christians because they think Christians are jerks. Here's the question you ought to ask. When someone plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven, right? You blame the player. So when someone plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus. Look, just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. We're fallen. That's why we need a Savior. You ought to expect Christians to get it wrong because we're all fallen. Now, hopefully we're getting better as we become more sanctified, but we're still fallen. And you shouldn't stay out of eternity because somebody else is a jerk, and by the way, so are you. We're all jerks, right? In fact, people who are not Christians don't even live up to their own standards. We're fallen. If there is no God, tolerance is no better than intolerance. By the way, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? No. Christians are commanded to be loving. You see, tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And how do you love people? You don't tolerate some of what they do if you truly love them. In fact, how many people in here are parents? Can I see your hand, please? All right. How many people in here are former children? Okay, that should be everybody. Question. If your parent tolerated everything you wanted to do as a child, was that parent loving? No. Parents need to stand in the way of evil to protect their kids. That's what love is. Love is not approval. Love is standing in the way of evil because you love someone. Do you guys know who Thomas Sowell is? The amazing economist who's now 92 years old, grew up in Harlem, but somehow taught himself to read, got a PhD, taught at some of the top schools in the world. Here's what he says. He says, when you tell someone what they need to hear, you're helping them. When you tell people what they want to hear, you're helping yourself. Why do we tell people what they want to hear? Because we don't want them mad at us. So we're helping ourselves when we do that. If we truly love people, we'll tell them what they need to hear. Because that's what love does. Love takes all the arrows from the loved one because you love that person. You will not enable them to do something that's going to hurt them or others. Instead of telling them the truth, you lie to them. If there is no God, you can't complain about the problem of evil either. Why? Because if there is no God, there's no such thing as evil. Not because God is doing evil, but because God is the standard of good that allows evil to even be possible. In fact, C.S. Lewis, early on in his life, was an atheist. He went through World War I. He lost his best friend. He said, there can't be a good God. There's too much injustice in the world. Then one day he had an epiphany, and he wrote it in the book Mere Christianity. How many have read Mere Christianity? Okay, if you haven't read Mere Christianity, consider yourself undereducated. Whether you're a Christian or not, you need to read that book. Here's what Lewis says in this book about the fact that his argument didn't work. He said, as an argument against God, or as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be not right unless something is right. So if you're saying something's evil, you're presupposing something's good. But if you're presupposing something's good, you're back to God. That's God's nature. You say, Frank, I don't quite get this. Can't evil exist independent of God? No, why? Because evil is a lack in a good thing. It's like a parasite. Evil's like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto. Right? No, it doesn't exist, right? It can only exist in a good thing. You could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil. But you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. If evil exists, God exists. Not because he's doing evil, but because he's the standard of good that allows evil to even exist. So evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it can't disprove God. Now you can ask, well, why does God allow certain evils? Maybe we'll save that for the Q&A. So when Christopher Hitchens wrote the book, how many remember Christopher Hitchens? Anyone remember Christopher Hitchens? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. When he wrote the book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, we had a couple of debates. This is a picture from our second debate. These debates you can see on the Cross-Examine YouTube channel. But he has it exactly backwards. Religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion because I can't live up to the pure words of Christ. But if I could, I wouldn't need them. In fact, in this debate, the College of New Jersey, I said, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. And when people say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. Yeah, we're all sinners. We're all fallen. We all need a Savior. The church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. We're fallen. So, what can we conclude from these three arguments? From the cosmological argument, we can see we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent first cause. From the design argument, we can see that this being, we get more information about this being intelligent. We also see that he sustains the universe. And from the moral argument, we can see that this being is also righteous. He's a moral standard. Now, ladies and gentlemen, from these three arguments, we can see there's a cause out there that's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things. And we haven't even opened the Bible yet. This is the God of the Bible without reference to any religious work. The only question we're going to ask now is, well, how do we know this is the God of the Bible? I mean, how do we know it's not some other theistic God? For that, we got to go to the third question, are miracles possible? And you're probably going, Frank, how are you going to finish this? This one doesn't take very long. Number 3 is the shortest. Because what are miracles used for in the Bible? Usually, when God is doing miracles through people, he's doing miracles to say, this person speaks for me. Listen to him. This is why miracles are done around Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. There are periods in the Bible, there's hundreds of years, there's no miracles going on because there's no new revelation. God uses miracles to confirm somebody who has new revelation. The problem is a lot of people don't believe miracles are possible. In fact, Noah and the ark. Hey, Christians, can we all agree on one thing? Noah and the ark is crazy! Please, come on, really. And a resurrection. I already asked you guys earlier, has anyone seen a resurrection? Nobody hand. Yet, to be a Christian, you got to believe in something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what is the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? Please. Well, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? What is it? It's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. Yeah. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. And here's the interesting thing. Even the atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. They're saying, yeah, space, matter, and time came into existence out of nothing. They try and come up with every possible alternative cause. I think they fail. So if Genesis 1:1 is true, are any of these other verses possible? Of course. If God can create the universe out of nothing, can He raise Jesus from the dead? Can He do the Noah miracle? I mean, of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Can He do the Jonah miracle? If He can create the universe out of nothing? Can He walk on water, part the Red Sea, turn water into wine? Can He do any of these things? Enable the Cubs to win the World Series at least once? Of course. He can do these things. Because if He can create the whole universe out of nothing, all these other miracles are easy. Now here's one problem. A lot of people don't believe in miracles because they've never seen one. That's not a good reason to disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen those? No, you're using them right now. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Oh, you may have seen people treated justly or unjustly, or you may have done so yourself, or been a victim of injustice, but you've never seen justice in itself because it's not something you see. It's an action, and it's grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen love. And everybody believes in love, don't we? In fact, in the second debate with Hitchens, some student at the College of New Jersey asked Christopher this question. Christopher, what is love? And Hitchens, being a materialist, someone that just thinks molecules are all that exists. There's no soul. There's just a body. There's no mind. There's just a brain. You're nothing but a moist robot. That's what he thinks. So he had to come up with a materialistic answer for love. You know what he said? What is love? He said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Well, I got the chemical today. Tomorrow I might not have it. Love is not a chemical. It's an immaterial virtue grounded in the nature of God. And it's an action, but it's not something you see. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, no, there's gravity right there. No, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. By the way, this is how we know that God exists. If someone were to say to you, how do you know that God exists? Here's what I suggest you say. I know God by His effects. I'm reasoning from effect back to cause. I don't see gravity, but I know there must be gravity because of the effect it gives. If there's a creation, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design in the universe and design in you, the effect, I'm reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If I have a moral law written on my heart, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a moral law giver. If I have this capacity to use my 3-pound brain and these laws of logic and mathematics and my senses to discover things outside of my skull and come to valid conclusions, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause of mind. If there's evidence that a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause. Who could have caused somebody to rise from the dead? God. Even if you think you've had a personal experience with God, you're doing the same thing. You're saying the experience is the effect, and you're reasoning back to a cause. This must be from God, whether it's answered prayer or whatever. You're always reasoning from effect to cause. That's what scientists do. And what's the queen of all sciences? It's not physics. That's what the materialists say. The queen of all science is theology, which includes physics and biology and history and sociology and anthropology and everything else. It's why you're supposed to come to university, to get unity and diversity, to see how all these various disciplines fit under one truth. Tragically, we don't teach that anymore. In any event, miracles are not necessary today for Christianity to be true. There could be no miracles since the first century and Christianity would still be true. I think there have been since then, but you don't need them for Christianity to be true. But you know what has to be true if atheism is true? That every single miracle claim and spiritual experience in the history of the world has to be mistaken. Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. Is it reasonable to believe? No, I don't think so. And by the way, if miracles do occur today or anytime, you shouldn't expect to see many of them. Why? Because by definition, miracles are rare events. If they occurred all the time, they wouldn't get our attention. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, Uncle, or you go to somebody and you say, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No. No, if people were popping up from the dead all the time, the resurrection of Christ would mean nothing. So they have to be rare events to get our attention. So, we know that miracles are possible because God does exist, and the greatest miracle is Genesis 1, and we even have scientific evidence for that. The next and final question is, well, is the New Testament true, particularly about the resurrection? Do we really know that Jesus rose from the dead? What evidence do we have for that? Now, in the book, we have at least 10 reasons why the New Testament writers are telling the truth. We don't have time for that tonight. We've got to get to questions here soon. I'm just going to show you 2 of them briefly, okay, that the New Testament writers are telling the truth. The first is called embarrassing stories. What are embarrassing stories? Historians know that if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors in a text, it's probably true. Why would it be true? Because you're not going to make up embarrassing things about yourself, right? You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to make yourself look bad or embarrass yourself. In fact, let me ask some of you guys here a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing stories they never would have invented. They're not making it up. That's why we call this the duh factor. In fact, let me just give you a few of these. Jesus calls Peter, their leader, Satan. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Mark, who wrote this down at one point, said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write something down like this. Let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. What do you think? John said, get out. Peter, roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants while the women went down to discover the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men. It was. But independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were, as embarrassing as it was. In fact, one of them was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Gee, what a great witness. Very credible there. No, they're not making this up. I actually had a woman come up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what happened? Oh, yeah, forgot to tell you. Nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? And he's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next passage is in the New Testament, but it is. Do you know the end of the Gospel of Matthew, the biography of Matthew, we call a gospel? The Great Commission. This is the climax. Jesus takes his disciples up on a hill in Galilee to give them the Great Commission. You know where he says, go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. Make disciples, right? Anyway, it says right there in verse 17, those disciples, about them, it's in verse 17, it says this, some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them, and they're saying they're doubting. It's like they're standing there going, you see that guy over there? Yep. That guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Look, Jesus is dead. The Romans killed him. I'm telling you, it's him. Jesus is dead. They nailed him to a cross. They whipped him. Before that, they put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be him. If the Romans didn't kill him, they'd have been killed themselves. I'm telling you, it's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even embarrassing details about Jesus in the text. Jesus is considered out of his mind by his own family who want to seize him and take him home. In other words, his own family thinks he's nuts. This is Mark chapter 3. His own brothers don't believe in him. How many people in here have a brother? All right, how many in here have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either, do you? Neither did James or any of the other brothers. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice 2 prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. The Messiah's bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Tamar plays a prostitute. Now, do you think when Matthew decided to put down the genealogies, he said, you know what, I really think we ought to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. What do you say, Rahab, Tamar? No. That's embarrassing. In fact, there's a lot of embarrassing people in the Messiah's bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, Jesus from the tribe of Judah, not a good guy. Jesus is the brother that sold his youngest brother, Joseph, into slavery in Egypt. And yet he's in the Messiah's bloodline. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess it's so for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in there. And when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he doesn't mention her name. What does he say instead? Uriah's wife. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. You notice that? Uriah is the husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. They're not making this up. This is embarrassing. And then Jesus, the Messiah to the Jews, is hung on a tree. Yeah, according to Deuteronomy 21:23, anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. Well, Jesus was under God's curse. What curse? The curse of sin. We put him under. But if you're inventing a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree. In fact, what are the 2 trees in Genesis? You remember? What are they? Tree of life, tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Fast forward all the way to the end of Revelation. Bible's very symmetrical. What's the tree at the end of the book of Revelation? Tree of life. You know there's a tree in the middle? The tree in the middle is the tree they hung Jesus on. Because we sinned at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the only way we're going to have access to the tree of life is if Jesus takes our punishment on the tree he was hung on, so we could have access to the tree of life. But if you're inventing this, you're never going to say that. In fact, Dennis Prager, you know who Dennis Prager is? Conservative, Jewish man, radio author, Prager University. He says, the reason I believe the Old Testament's true is because nobody would invent such an embarrassing history of their own people. Well, my question to Dennis is, if the principle of embarrassment works in the Old Testament, why doesn't it work in the New? Because these guys wouldn't have made themselves look so bad if they're making it up. They're not making it up. One more of these, and that is excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says that these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying it never happened. Now, it's absolutely critically important that you recognize who these people were, the first believers and the people that wrote down the New Testament. You know who they were? All of them were Jews. The only exception is Luke. He's the only non-Jew. All the other writers think that they're part of God's chosen people. And there are two things they didn't believe. They didn't believe a man could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. And they didn't believe that a resurrection would occur to one guy in the middle of time. They thought everyone would rise from the dead according to Daniel 12 at the end of time. But they didn't think a man could claim to be God and resurrect from the dead in the middle of time. Yet that's exactly what they said happened. And they went to their deaths saying that. Why? What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? They got kicked out of the synagogue and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah, what's it going to get us? First we'll get kicked out of the synagogue, then we'll get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. No, I don't think they're making this up. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. In fact, my friend J. Warner Wallace, I don't know if you know who he is. He's a cold case homicide detective, been on Dateline more than any other detective because he solves murders decades old. He's also a Christian, and he took his homicide skills to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. And Jim says whenever he finds a murdered body, he knows there's only 3 reasons why that guy's dead. Not 1,000 reasons, there's only 3. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. Those are the 3 things that can drive people to murder. As I mentioned earlier, those are the same 3 things that can cause any of us to sin. Why? Because those are good things and we'll take shortcuts to get them. So Jim says that if you're going to say that the New Testament writers have invented all this, you got to find one of those 3 motivators. Let's take a look at them real quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite. They got persecuted. Paul had power when he was Saul persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. They're not making this up. Now, some people will say, well, do you have any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, they're all in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, but they're not eyewitnesses. And while they may corroborate what happened, they're not as good as the documents we have that we call the New Testament. In fact, if you think about people asking for non-Christian evidence, it's almost like they're saying you can't trust these people. If you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you realize how stupid that is. These people had everything to lose by saying it was true, not everything to gain. And then, why would they die for a known lie? You might at this point say, wait a minute, Frank, time out. If you're going to say that martyrdom in some way shows Christianity's true, don't you have to say that martyrdom in some way shows Islam's true? No. Why? Well, there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. But let me just give you one major difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs of today haven't witnessed anything that tells them Islam is true. They just have faith. The New Testament martyrs of New Testament times, on the other hand, saw Jesus risen from the dead. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for something that isn't true, even though they think it is. Nobody's going to die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence that unless you were there yourself. Now, the next thing I'm about to say, the last thing I'm going to say about this is going to sound like heresy for a minute for those of you that believe the Bible's inerrant like I do. But it's not. Just stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we call the Bible, that we put under one binding and we call the Bible, says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Of course, why? Because the writers witnessed the resurrected Jesus, or knew people that had. They didn't read about it in a book. They witnessed it themselves, and then they wrote it down. You see, Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. You would never have Jews in the first century say a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead unless a man actually did claim to be God and actually did rise from the dead. In fact, you could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. Now, thankfully, they did write it down so we could know about it and orient our lives according to it, but it would have been true if they never told anybody about it. Because Christianity, again, originated with an event, not a book. So you might want to show people who are not Christians, there's evidence that Jesus rose from the dead, and if there's evidence that he rose from the dead and he truly is God, then we can trust what he says. Inerrancy is not a premise, it's a conclusion. The reason I believe the Bible's inerrant is because Jesus did. And I just think it's unwise to disagree with Jesus. By the way, there's more evidence we didn't have time to get into, like early sources, eyewitness details, embedded confirmation, expected predictions, Old Testament prophecy, extra biblical writers, and the explosive growth of the church. Really hard to explain how Christianity began on an empirical claim that could have been refuted by taking Jesus' body out of the tomb. The Romans and the Jews wanted Christianity to be squashed, and they could have done it if Jesus' body was in the tomb, but obviously it wasn't. All right, here's the overall argument. Does truth exist? If somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? First argument. Cosmological. Second argument. Teleological. Third argument. Moral argument. Are miracles possible? Yes. One guy got it. All right. Yes. Miracles are possible. If God exists, miracles are possible. What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Does it look like the New Testament writers are telling the truth about the resurrection? Yeah, they had every motive to say it wasn't true, not every motive to say it was. Now, here's what you have to do if you want to get this entire PowerPoint presentation. Text the word evidence to this phone number, 855-909-0582. 855-909-0582. The entire PowerPoint presentation is 362 slides. I only showed you about 50 of them. Okay, I'm going to send it to you in a PDF format. I'm going to send you about 5 other PowerPoint presentations too by just texting to that number. There's a few books and DVDs over there. In fact, we ran out of, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist at Ball State the other night, but Stealing from God is there, and the last chapter of Stealing from God, the second to last chapter, is a summary of the Atheist book. So it's basically what we covered tonight. There's also a 12-part DVD series over there. By the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Just so you know. I got 3 sons, so I need some help, all right? We're now teaching online courses. This week we're starting an online course called Life's Compass, Jesus, You, and the Essentials of the Faith. So if you want to go further into that, I'll be your instructor there. Just check it out at crossexamine.org. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these 3 into one social media platform. We call it UTwitface. Have you guys signed up for UTwitface yet? It's kind of a Jersey thing. That's where I'm from. We're also on Instagram and TikTok. The I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. Don't forget about that. TV's on Wednesday night. And if you don't do anything else, download the free Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store. Cross-Examined. Not only does it have the podcast streaming, it has the TV show streaming. It even has a quick answer section in there. So you might be having lunch with somebody, and they say something that's wrong about Christianity. You're not quite sure how to answer it. All you need to do is take out your iPhone or your Droid and go, hey, hang on. I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? It's right there. All right. It's true. So what? So what if Christianity is true? So what? Well, the best news of all, somebody actually did die for you. When I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, and we had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in any military, perhaps, to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs wear. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through, maybe 5%. Those that do earn that trident wear it with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed for them. That's what we're supposed to do. But you know, our culture says, oh no, put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your sexual orientation, or your sexual preference, or your gender preference, or put your identity in your bank account, or your vocation, or your boyfriend, or your girlfriend. Do you realize that none of those things are ultimate? If you put your identity in your job and you lose your job, what, you no longer have an identity? You put your identity in another person and they die or leave you, you no longer have an identity? You put your identity in your sexual preference and at one point you're no longer sexually preferred, you no longer have an identity? If you have to achieve your identity, all the pressure's on you, and there's always somebody that can do it better. No, in Christianity you don't achieve your identity. You receive your identity. You simply accept it. The Creator that created you and then loved you enough to die for you gives you an eternal identity that you can't lose. You can lose just about every other identity you might pick. And ultimately you're going to lose your life. The only thing you can't lose is Jesus, who not only died, but also rose again. Has everyone in here repented and accepted what he has done and asked him to come into your life? If you haven't, why wouldn't you? It's an eternal identity, and you don't achieve it, you receive it. Now in a few minutes we're going to do some questions, but Nick's going to come up and tell us a few things about how we can follow up. If you want to learn more about this kind of material, there's a bunch of different college campus groups that have sponsored this. They're up on the screen here. Or if you just want fellowship with other Christians, Nick, tell them about that if you would.
All right. Up on the screen there are all the campus organizations that were involved in making this happen, involved in promotion and getting people excited for the event and everything else. If you want to find out more about them, please do inquire. We have some tables over there. Please do use the QR code up there as well. Give us feedback. Let us know how things went. We want to hear from you directly. So yeah, and that's really about it. There's organizations that will fulfill every niche, whatever you want to do. If you want a Bible study, if you want apologetics, if you're more of a sermon person, or you more want to deal with heady stuff and a lot of the stuff that you heard tonight, and dig a little deeper into it, get follow-ups, ask questions about what you heard. All that's up there. So that's really about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Please use that QR code. Just put your camera on that, and it'll give you all sorts of different options. And you can also tell us what we could have done better in this seminar. You'll also get some follow-up, so if you want to go further, you can. And please, give a round of applause to all of these organizations that put this together. And you've got a bunch of them over here, so make sure you take a look at their material. Now, it's time for Q&A, and since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question. So come right out up here to the mic. You have to come up to the mic because there's people watching out there in internet land, and they will not hear you if you don't come up to the mic. We just need one person to start, and then everybody else will come up. This gentleman right here, Ibrahim? Yeah, Ibrahim. Yep, we met earlier. All the way from Jordan, ladies and gentlemen, here he is. Yes, sir. Hey, by the way, if anyone wants a question after Ibrahim, just come up behind him now so we don't have to wait for somebody to walk across the room. Yes, sir, go ahead.
First, I'm not here to say there is no God or there is no truth or the Bible is not real. I'm just some questions about what you said, especially about point 4 about is the New Testament true or not?
Yes.
And you mentioned about being embarrassed story, and they died for it. And I believe if you do that for all other religions, we can do that. For example, in Islam, because I grew up as Muslim, you will see a lot of embarrassing stories about Muhammad in the Quran, in the Hadith, and it was always mentioned that God was like telling Muhammad you were wrong, and kind of like what you did there is wrong, and it's embarrassing for him, and everyone was like kind of making fun of him because of that. You can see a lot of people died because following Muhammad, and especially at the beginning, a lot of them were killed and stoned, and you can go to other religions or mythologies, like Greek mythology, for example. You look at Zeus, he was the worst person I ever read about. And there's still some people who worship him. I mean, we can look at all other religions and we can say there's embarrassing stories. I'm not here to say that the Bible is not real, but I just feel what you said could work on all other religions.
Well, you have to look at every claim on a case-by-case basis. So say if you go to Islam and you say, well, many people died for Muhammad in Islam, that's
God,
true.
Not Muhammad.
What's that?
For God, not
Okay,
Muhammad.
that's true, and people will die in battle for who they believe to be God, but they were not dying for a miracle claim. They were not dying for a man that rose from the dead, and they were not predisposed to believe it before he rose from the dead. As you well know, Muhammad was a great warrior and a great leader, and he got people around him to raid Meccan caravans from Medina to Mecca, and he divided up the treasure that he took from those caravans. And so there was a reward to go with Muhammad, and there was also a problem if you didn't go with Muhammad.
That was like 20 years after Muhammad went to Medina. At the beginning, people were killed for no reason. He didn't promise them for anything. They didn't have anything else, and they were killed just because they believed in Muhammad.
Right. Oh, there are people that'll die, but they're not dying for witnessing a miracle and saying, I'm going to die for this particular person because he rose from the dead, and I never thought a person could rise from the dead. And as you know, I didn't have time to get into this, maybe you might not know, but the Jewish believers in Yahweh abandoned so many of their long-held beliefs now to follow Jesus. They no longer obeyed the sacrificial system. They no longer were circumcised. They no longer obeyed the Sabbath. They no longer said you had to obey Moses. They pretty much turned their world upside down 180 degrees They went from scared, scattered, skeptical disciples who ran away to become the most powerful, successful, peaceful, evangelical missionary force in the history of the world because they witnessed a resurrected Jesus. Not because they were involved in any kind of battle. In fact, they were killed for what they did. They weren't taking up arms. Muhammad's life was different. Muhammad was a military and political leader. Jesus wasn't. Other than when he went after the Pharisees for their bad policies. Jesus wasn't here to overturn the Roman government. He was here to overturn human hearts and have them trust in him because he was the one that could save them. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, yeah, but what about the embarrassing stories about Muhammad in the Quran, for example?
Okay, well, maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe those things really did happen. And I assume there's much true in the Quran. But there's nothing in the Quran that's miraculous. In fact, as you know, Muhammad said, I don't do miracles, I'm just a plain warner. The miracles attributed to Muhammad come in the Hadith, which is like 150 years later, which would seem to me would contradict the Quran. If Muhammad said I never did miracles, why are people later, 150 years, saying, oh, he did?
I mean, I agree with you. That's why I left that faith. But
Oh, okay. Are you a Christian?
Oh, yeah, I am.
All right,
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I just have more questions, but is it fine if I go back?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Ben,
So you remember me?
we met outside.
That's
Ben,
awesome.
I don't know if this is still the truth, Ben, but you started as an atheist and started
Yeah.
going to Ratio Christi, right? I don't know if
Yeah.
you're still an atheist or not, but you started that way.
I would still identify as an atheist
Okay.
at the moment because, one presentation isn't going to automatically change.
Oh, come on, Ben!
Well, I'm not that easy,
Oh,
It takes
gee.
a lot of work.
I'm
to
sweating
change-
up here, man.
It takes a lot of work to change
All right.
people's minds. Oh crap! I'm on the microphone. This is a little nerve-wracking.
No, go ahead. Take your time. Take your time.
But my question is, who's the authority on Christianity? Because you can say all these things about Christianity, and you can say, well, the Bible claims it so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, millions and millions of Christians all have different idea of what the Bible claims. I'm an ex-Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And,
As am I. Yeah.
You are, fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So, you'd have Catholics who will tell you need to do X, Y, Z. They believe faith and works. You'll get Catholics who say, oh, you need to receive the Eucharist if you're familiar with it in the Catholic faith. Receiving body and blood of Jesus. They believe that is literally the body and blood. You must receive it in order to get into heaven. You must do X, Y, Z in order to get into heaven. You'll get other Christians, non-Catholics, who will say, oh, if you're believing this one thing about Christianity, oh, you're screwed. You're going to be screwed if you keep believing this thing. You get so much conflicting messages.
Okay, why do you
in
think that is,
Christianity.
though, Ben?
I imagine the Christian answer would be, well, Satan. But then how do you parse through all the crud and get to, okay, who might actually be a semi-reasonable authority? Because, you believe you go to a church.
Right,
You
well-
believe your pastor is at least, while fallible, somewhat of an authority on
Yes.
it. How do you go through and say, okay, I assume you wouldn't go to a Catholic church anymore. You wouldn't take a Catholic priest as much of an authority figure on the faith as maybe your pastor at your church. How do you sift through the crap?
What the scriptures tell us to do is to test all things and to not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see if they're from God. The authority is actually Jesus. All authority has been given to me, he said, on heaven and on earth. And the reason we spend a lot of time pointing out that the scriptures are telling the truth is because if they are telling the truth, then Jesus is our authority, and he gave his blessing to the apostles to write the New Testament. And the people that wrote the New Testament were confirmed by miracles or people that did miracles, such as the fact that Luke was confirmed by Paul, okay? So we look at the documents, and in fact, let me say this. We did a podcast 2 or 3 years ago called Why Are There So Many Denominations? It's 45 minutes long, so I can't go through the entire thing here, but let me just sort of cut to the bottom line. There are so many denominations because the denominations that believe the Bible is true differ over minor things. They don't differ over major things, okay? There are many denominations that don't believe the Bible's true. And as my mentor, Dr. Norman Geisler, used to say, these denominations are nothing but hymn-singing Rotary clubs, right? They don't really believe the Bible, yet they're trying to call themselves Christians. And I have a hard time when people call themselves Christians yet disagree with Jesus. Why do you call yourself a Christian if you're disagreeing with Jesus? On the essentials, they all agree. There is a God. You are not him. I am not him. We've all sinned. We all need a Savior, and Jesus is the Savior who came into the space-time continuum to live the perfect life and take our punishment on himself. And then by trusting in him, you can have your sins forgiven and given Christ's righteousness. And I think that's clear in the Scriptures. I think some people have confused what Christians would call sanctification and justification. I think this is what happens in the Catholic Church. They put together justification and sanctification. Justification is the moment you believe you're saved. Sanctification is a long-term process where you're becoming more and more like Jesus through the power of the Spirit. And sometimes I think people put those two together and say, well, you have to demonstrate good works in order to be saved. Works are evidence of your salvation, but they're not the cause of your salvation. As Martin Luther famously said, you're saved by faith alone, but your faith is not alone. Okay? So I think that's the main problem between Roman Catholics and evangelicals, is that Catholics try and put those two things together when they should be separated. And my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, wrote a great book called Roman Catholics and Evangelicals, Agreements and Differences. So the bottom line is, on denominations that believe the Bible's true, they differ on very little. On no major issues, they differ on secondary and tertiary issues. Mode of baptism, eschatology, what color should the carpet be, you know, these kind of things, all right?
So you would say that all you need to do to become a Christian is profess faith in Jesus Christ.
That's how you become a Christian, but you don't
And
stay
then-
that as a Christian. You then are prepared to do good works, as Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2.
So you would say that works are...
Works are evidence you're a Christian. They're not the cause of you being a Christian. Does that make sense?
Somewhat.
Okay. Well, look,
But,
if you fall in love with somebody,
yeah.
and that somebody wants you to do certain things for them, you would do it because you love them, not because you're trying to obey a set of rules and feel obligated. You're doing it because you love them. And in Christianity, we love Jesus and what he did for us, and as a result of that, out of gratitude for what he's done for us, we're going to do good works and bring other people into the kingdom.
Would those works necessarily be required, say, said Christian?
Required for what?
Required for salvation.
No,
Required
not
to get-
required for salvation.
So you could profess to be a Christian. Maybe you're just not that great of a Christian. You profess to be a Christian, but you don't do XYZ work. You may not go to church.
Mm-hmm.
You believe that individual still can get in heaven, even if they're not the greatest.
Of course, if this person truly has been saved. And I don't know if it was C.S. Lewis who made this point, or Tim Keller, or one of, I can't remember where, but Christianity attracts a lot of people who are down and out, right? They want to be saved from the life they're in. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, on a moral scale from 1 to 10, a lot of Christians started at 2, right? And after 5 years, they're a 3. But some other Christian may have come in at a 7 morally, and he's only at a 7.5, and he's looking down at the guy who went from 2 to 3 going, you haven't done much. But he actually made more improvement than the guy who was at a 7, right? Because of the raw material where they started from. And this is why Jesus says, by the way, to whom much is given, much will be required. You know, so Christianity, we're not supposed to be comparing ourselves with one another. I don't know where your background is. I don't know your gifts, your talents. I don't know how different they are from mine.
That's about it.
What?
Massive computer nerd, that's about it.
Well, we need massive computer nerds. So you're going to contribute to the body of Christ because you're going to become a Christian, right?
No clue, honestly. May take years.
If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
I don't know. I'd have to genuinely take time to think about that.
Why?
But
You mean if the God of the universe literally created you and then came into the space-time continuum to die a brutal death to save you, you wouldn't accept his invitation?
I don't know, because said God also justifies eternal torment for however great your crimes are on earth, eternal torment for finite crimes on this planet, no matter how big.
Okay, but what moral standard are you judging that to be wrong?
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but they don't seem to be equal, at least by time-wise.
Well,
But again, I mentioned
if
I'd have to think about it first.
Okay, well, good. We'll think about it. But if I shot you right now and it took me 2 seconds to shoot and kill you, should I only serve a 2-second sentence?
No.
Okay. So quite often the sentence is a lot longer than the time it took to commit the crime. Also, who says you stop sinning when you're in hell?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
I mean, who says that you stop sinning when you're in hell? You don't.
But there's
Punishment
also,
continues.
But what do we know about it other than...
We don't know a whole lot. We just know we don't want to be there. But look,
Yeah, fair.
if God exists, and he does, and if there's an afterlife, and there is, logically there's only two places you can go. You can either be with God in the afterlife or be separated from God in the afterlife. And God will give everybody what they want. Those that want to be with him will be. Those that want to be separated from him will be as well. He will not force you into heaven against your will.
Okay. That's all the question.
Hey, if I gave you a book, would you read it?
Maybe in audiobook form, but I don't... My problem is I don't read very well. I don't read
I
very
can't
well.
give you an audio book.
I'm fully aware. Maybe I'll go find one. I don't know.
If I gave you a written book, would you read it over the next year?
We'll find out. I don't know. If you handed it to me...
I'm striking out. Can you help me over here?
If you handed it to me, I'd be more likely to read it than anything else that I haven't read yet.
Is that going to be good enough? Yeah. That's good enough. All right, give him a book over there. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Can you hear me if I need to raise it?
Yeah, raise it up. Yeah, go ahead if you can.
Okay. Okay. My question
what's your name?
is... Oh, Evan.
Evan, go ahead,
Yeah.
sir.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking. So in Dr. Craig's book, On Guard, he kind of talks a little bit about how in America we have this problem where people are so used to the concept of God that they almost think that they don't consider what society would be like without him at all.
Yes.
And what I've experienced a lot in going and doing evangelism with my friends or in my free time is a lot of people, you can present the gospel to them or you can try and engage them in conversation about having a relationship with God or the gospel, and they'll just seem kind of uninterested. Mm-hmm. How would you, or they'll just say, oh, that's great, but that's kind of the end of their sentence. How would you engage someone who seems uninterested or doesn't really know why they need God, even if you present it to them? Like, what question would you ask them to kind of open their hearts to the idea of, you need this?
Yeah, if I knew the answer to that, first of all, I'd be a billionaire. If I could get people to move from apathy to interest, and secondly, everyone would be saved. But you notice Jesus didn't get everybody to agree with what he said. Because people have free will and they have reasons for doing what they do or don't do. I'm reminded of a class we had in the seminary where Dr. Geisler asked, what's the greatest problem in America today? Is it ignorance or apathy? And one student said, I don't know and I don't care. How do you get people interested? Sometimes you can't. So when I ask somebody if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And they hesitate or say no, or as Ben said, I don't know, there's 4 things I think you can do. Maybe there's more than this. And this is an opportunity for you to actually use different gifts rather than just logic. And that is, number 1, you can pray for them. Number 2, you can plant seeds every now and then that move people either away from their worldview or into the Christian worldview or both. Number 3, you can love them, which, as I said earlier, doesn't necessarily mean you approve of everything they do. And number 4, you can wait. Why wait? Because not everybody is going to be at the same level of spiritual interest throughout their lives. None of us were at the same level of spiritual interest at every point in our life, right? We're not. But what might happen in that person's life, something could happen that's tragic because it happens to most of us at some point. If that person's ever going to be interested, it's when a tragedy strikes, then your phone is going to ring and that person's going to be on the other end. They're not going to call their atheist friend when a tragedy strikes. What's the atheist friend going to say? Well, there's no rhyme or reason to life. This stuff just happens. No, they're going to call you a person of spiritual depth. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So pray for them, plant seeds, love them, and then wait. And, of course, ask the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And then if they say, well, no, I don't know, or no, you could say, why wouldn't you be interested in eternity? Certainly more important than the lifespan we have here.
Yeah.
All right?
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hunter.
Hunter, go ahead. So we're going to turn that down just a little bit.
Cool.
Go ahead.
I'm good?
Yeah.
Okay. So I know atheists with a stronger faith in nothing than believers with a faith in God. So you asked the question to some atheists, if they knew God were real, would they accept him?
Right.
Jesus' death for their sins, and they say no. So my question is, and this is a little rhetorical, but you're more than welcome to answer it, and this is to all believers. If you knew God wasn't real, or that Jesus had not resurrected, would you still follow his teachings?
Yeah, that's the question you have to answer for yourself. Now, some of Jesus' teachings we know are true even if God doesn't exist, right? Or let me put it another way, if the Christian God doesn't exist. If there's another God, and he's the standard of righteousness, much of what Jesus said aligns with that. What can't be true is certain moral principles are obligatory if there's no God, because it's just one person's opinion against another. But Paul actually says, if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, a Christian's faith is in vain, and we're to be most pitied among people. So, yeah, there's no reason to be a Christian if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead. Christianity is not centered on good social action. It's not centered on even love. You know what it's centered on? It's centered on forgiveness. That's what it's about. That we're to be forgiven, and Jesus is the means through which we're forgiven. And if that's not true, it's just another works-based religion. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Hunter. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Jesse.
Jesse, go ahead.
So we talked about how unjust and evil cannot exist without just and good. And it had me wondering how I am a believer. I'm thrilled by the chance to pick your brain. How do we know that good and what's just is from God rather than like a moral consensus?
Well, our country was founded on this principle. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson is expressing the natural law that Paul expressed 1,700 years before him when he said, Gentiles and I have the law written on their heart. That God has placed basic right and wrong on our hearts. And there's actually a philosopher down at UT Austin, his name is J. Budziszewski, who 20 years ago wrote a book called What We Can't Not Know. You can't not know murder's wrong. You can't not know rape is wrong. You can't not know theft is wrong. In order for you to forget that it's wrong, you've got to be either thoroughly propagandized by bad education or bad experience. But as Budziszewski says, and I think he's right, as soon as you're old enough to know what murder is and to know what wrong is, you know murder's wrong. That's just written on your heart. That's how you know it. But how you know it doesn't explain why it's wrong. There's got to be a standard beyond us that we're obligated to obey for murder to be wrong. Otherwise, it's just someone's opinion. And getting a bunch of opinions together doesn't make it objective. We could have everybody in the earth agree that murder's wrong, But if there's no standard beyond us that we're obligated to obey, that's just a majority opinion. And the only way we could tell the Nazis were wrong is we appealed to a standard beyond our two governments. Remember when we took the Nazis to Nuremberg, what was their defense when we said, you committed war crimes? Their defense was, hey, we're just following orders. And we came in and we said, you have a moral obligation to disobey immoral orders because there's a standard beyond your government called natural law, international law. C.S. Lewis called it the moral law, and Thomas Jefferson called it nature's law. It's God's nature. You have an obligation to obey that and disobey anything that contradicts with that. So unless that exists, nothing's right or wrong. Here's maybe an easy illustration that can show the difference between what we call epistemology, which is how we know certain things, versus ontology, which is the study of the thing we're trying to know, the being we're trying to know. We can go outside right now and see a speed limit. In fact, coming in here, it was too slow. It was 25 miles an hour. The sign kept flashing at me. I'm going 30. Slow down. I'm going 30. Anyway, I can know that the sign says 25 miles an hour, right? And I can deny that there was a traffic authority that put that sign there. But there would be no sign to know unless there was a traffic authority that put that sign there, right? I mean, I can know it and deny that there's a traffic authority, or the cops, or whoever you want to call, put that up there, right? I mean, I can know it and deny there's a traffic authority, but there would be no sign to know unless there was a traffic authority. So how I know it is I just look at it and go, yeah, it says 25 miles an hour. That's epistemology. But that sign is up. It's up there because there's a traffic authority that put it there. Same thing is true with thou shalt not murder. You can know murder's wrong and deny there's a God. But you just can't justify why murder is wrong unless there is a God. Does that make any sense?
It does. So if someone is like emotionally unstable and says, oh, murder is right, then that is just because they're denying like the sign. Like,
well,
take the speed limit
emotionally
example
unstable, you can be talked out of it. Your conscience can be seared. In fact, Paul talks about this in Romans 1, where he says, we suppress the truth long enough in unrighteousness, God is going to give us over to a futile mind to the point that when you get to the end of Romans chapter 1, he said, these people are not only doing evil, they're cheering on other people who are doing evil. I'm going to give you an example of this. It's happening in our government right now. California has gone from, you remember when Bill Clinton was around, he used to talk about abortion being safe, legal, and rare? How have we gone from safe, legal, and rare to shout your abortion, we will pay for you to come to California and actually kill your child? We'll applaud you to do that. That's the end of Romans 1. Everybody should be, I don't even care what your opinion is on abortion, you should know that it's not a good thing. And you shouldn't be cheering other people on to get abortions, but that's exactly what's going on now. Because God has given some people over to a depraved mind. Why? Because they keep suppressing the truth. They keep saying, I don't want you, God. I don't want you. I want to go this way. Okay. That's what love does.
So you would say that like the people that are emotionally unstable and don't follow that, follow that consensus that like murder is wrong, for example, those people are just suppressing the truth that they know?
Or they've suppressed it so long that they no longer know there's a God and they no longer know it's wrong. You can have your conscience seared. In fact, there are people walking the streets right now that are literally irredeemable. There's nothing that would bring them back. Only God knows who they are. We treat everybody like they're redeemable. But what does love do? If love pursues a person long enough and the person keeps saying, no, 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 I don't want you, the loved one says, okay, I'm going to give you what you want. I'm going to leave you alone. That's ultimately what hell is. I'm going to leave you alone. Yep. All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Cool.
Ibrahim. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I'm back.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this question will be a little bit dark. And I'm not here to, again, say the Bible is not true. But I have, sometimes when I read the Old Testament, I have some problems with some stuff. New Testament, I love it. I don't have any problem. But I look at the Old Testament, you look at Genesis in the beginning, God, flooded the earth and killed many people. Then you go again to Exodus, he hardened Pharaoh's heart and he killed them all, killed first their first son, then killed them all. Later on, you see in Joshua, God commanded Joshua to kill in Jericho all, not only the people who fight, the men, the women, the children, the animals, burn the city. And later on, you see in...
Oh, that's good. We can't cover all that. So, okay, God acting badly in the Old Testament.
The point is, I know you would say now is like, the old, like people were different, they're living different in wars and stuff, but why didn't God tell them in the Old Testament that this is just this time? Because, for example, I told you before, I'm originally from Palestine, and guess what? The Jews still kill us because of these stuff. So...
What do you mean by that? We still kill
family members died because of the Jew, read of the Old Testament, and they think we are God's chosen people. We can kill these Palestinian people.
Well, if they think that, they're just in error. Because those commands in the Old Testament were for a specific time, for a specific people, to get the promised Messiah into the promised land, because those people had been conducting immoral acts for over 400 years. The Canaanites, they were sacrificing their children to Molech.
I'm not telling you they were right. I'm not telling you they were right. But the difference between killing them to, sharing with them and telling them who Jesus is, I mean, why didn't God do that from the beginning instead of just, go kill them, instead of like send them prophets or send them, people to tell them what you're doing is wrong?
Well, according to Genesis, let's talk about the Canaanites. God gave them warnings for 400 years. How he did that, we don't know, but they were warned for 400 years, and they had the moral law written on their hearts. They knew right from wrong. And it got to the point where they're sacrificing their children to the molten hot metal god Molech. They would heat this thing up and put their babies on it, the arms, and watch the baby sizzle to death. In fact, Plutarch, a Greek writer, talks about this. He said that the drummers in the town would pound their drums louder so the parents couldn't hear the screams of their children being sacrificed to Molech.
I did read about that. Yeah, I know.
Right. And so God said this needs to end, right?
Yeah.
And he wiped out, he drove them out, and there are two views on this. One view is, when he said kill everyone, that's what he meant. Just wipe them all out, get them out of the land. If they don't go, kill them. The other view is this was exaggerated language to bring judgment upon them and push them out of the land, but not kill everybody. And one, Paul Copan, who is an Old Testament scholar on this, says the reason he thinks it's exaggerated language is because in Deuteronomy 7, it says this, wipe everybody out. And then it says, and then don't intermarry with them. And you're going, wait a minute. If everybody's wiped out, how could you intermarry with them? And this was common ancient Near East language, exaggerated language to say you need to score a complete victory. But let's assume that's not true. Let's assume God said wipe everybody out, women, children, everybody. When God kills somebody, is that murder for him?
I don't know.
No, of course not. He's the creator of life. He can resurrect life. Look, if Christianity is true, people don't die, they just change location. They go from this life to the next life, and it's up to God when that happens. If he brings judgment on people, a group of people or individuals, and he will on all of us at some point, it's not murder for him. He's just taken us into eternity. And it wasn't genocide. Why? Because God did the same thing to Israelites. Do you remember when the Israelites came, when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, and they're worshiping the golden calf?
Yeah.
3,000 of them were killed that day because of what they did. So this is not genocide, this is sinocide, if you would say. He's doing the same thing to people who are sinning.
I'm not trying to say that what God did is, wrong, but or they didn't deserve what happened, but what is the children's fault, for example, or the animals, or the people who didn't have any other choices? It did literally everyone there who were
let's say he killed all the children too. Okay, what would happen, just from a practical perspective, we're just speculating here, it doesn't say this in the text, what would happen if they killed all the parents, and what would they do with the children?
I mean, there is adoption. They could take them.
What do you think would happen if this really did happen, and then the kids grew up and learned that their parents had actually killed their parents. Their adoptive parents had killed their biological parents.
Then I don't know what to say, but
We're speculating. We
we
don't
see
know.
the point is also killing
Yeah.
them was wrong because you did like raise these kids and like you killed their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you like, I just means like God is much like he knows everything.
Of course
Didn't
he does.
Like why didn't he do something that is much better than
Well, when you
killing?
ask why did God do this and not that, since we don't have the complete mind of God, we don't know. We're speculating.
Okay,
Right.
but the thing again, I'm not saying that.
And we're assuming a moral standard here, aren't we?
Yeah,
That it would be wrong for God to kill people when in fact we know that's not wrong.
but because of this, many people are dying now.
Why?
because of
Why are they
that.
dying now?
Because people are following what is written in.
I don't, maybe I'm totally naive, but I don't know of any major group that's going back to Deuteronomy 7, where it says wipe out the Amorites or the Canaanites, and is applying that to people today.
I mean,
Because
not today,
those
but
people don't exist.
1948.
What's that?
1948. When the Jews entered the land, they
Uh-huh.
killed. Literally, there's a lot of cities were killed, and everyone.
Okay, but
there-
were they using Deuteronomy 7 for their justification?
Mhm.
Well, I just think that's wrong. I don't think that's
But
the
they
right
believe it's
justification.
right,
Well,
be-
maybe
based
they
on
do.
their
There's a lot of
religion.
people that believe things that are
Then-
right that aren't.
Then, if they believe because they think God told them this, why
But
didn't God
that's a
tell them this
misreading
in a
of
way?
the text. It doesn't say kill the Palestinians in 1948 in
But
Deuteronomy
it
7.
never told them to stop later.
What's that?
It never told them to stop and not do that in the future.
I'm sure it did. It's a temporary command. It's not a. He doesn't say
But they
kill
don't believe
everybody
that. That's the
forever.
thing. I mean, they don't believe that. The Jews
Oh,
don't believe
well,
that.
you'd have to show me some Jewish writer who says that's the case. I've
Okay.
never come across that.
I can show you. I mean,
Okay.
there's Talmud and others that's.
All right. All right. Thank
Talking
you.
about this
We got to move on. But good questions. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Richard Mensa.
Say again.
Richard Mensa.
Richard Nixon.
Mensa, like.
Mensa. I was going to say what?
I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa.
Yes, sir.
That's
Welcome.
where the accent is coming from. So,
Yes, sir.
I mean, if we're talking about what he just said, I mean, the Quran tells us that we are najis.
That we are what?
Najis. Najis, I don't want to explain, but it's a bad word.
Okay.
Anybody who is not a Muslim is a najis. Okay, we are bad people.
Oh, infidels.
It's
Okay.
more than that.
All right.
I was a Muslim until I was 19.
Okay.
So I knew my Quran.
All right.
So, well, anyway, I just want to say that thank you and God bless you for what you do. Your first video that I saw was in August 2012, the debate you had with Dr. Hitchens.
Yes.
And since then, I've been following you. And from time to time, I introduce, we watch your video and discuss it in church. I'm a pastor.
Oh, thank you.
So my family is hooked on your videos. So,
Oh, good, good.
yeah.
Thank you.
So last Friday, when I turned on my work computer, Microsoft showed me the square universe that he showed earlier on, so many stars and galaxies and everything. And that got me thinking, okay, the description says something like, that square thing is like 63 billion or million times the size of the sun.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I was thinking about that all day or the next day. So the thing is like, if looking at the vastness of the universe,
Yes.
could it be possible that there's some entities or somebody else elsewhere?
You mean, is there intelligent life in other parts of the universe?
Yes, or just us?
I'm not sure we're intelligent life. Do you think we are?
Well, not
Given what's going on lately? Okay,
no.
yeah, okay, I
know.
get what you mean.
So it
there
is like,
could be intelligent life out there given the vastness of the universe, but let me just say what atheist researchers have said.
okay.
Not Christians, atheists. Ward and Brownlee, I think is the name. I have the book called Rare Earth. And their point is, despite the vastness of the universe, according to them, it's highly unlikely there's this kind of carbon-based life anywhere else in the universe. Because there are too many parameters that need to be precisely just the way they are here for that to take place. And just getting a planet that could support life doesn't get you life. That's a necessary condition for life. It's not a sufficient condition for life. Right? You can have an Earth-like planet somewhere, but no life on it. So how do you get life is the question.
Yeah.
That's the hard question.
Yeah, I mean, my conclusions were this. Either there are some entities elsewhere because of the size of the universe, or it's just us. And if just us, that's when I teared up. I began to weep. So, because if it's just us, then if I consider the love of God to move across all these, galaxies and everything to come and love me.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
Well said, brother.
Thank you.
Well said, Pastor. That's right. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Josh.
Josh, go ahead, sir.
Okay, so
Just get a little closer to that mic if you don't mind.
which mic?
Just tilt it up a little
Okay.
bit. Yeah, there you go.
Sounds good, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to tell you a story real quick.
A short one, right?
A short story.
Okay,
yeah,
go.
Yeah, it's not made up, not
All
at
right.
all. Yeah, I was talking to my friend Joe Schmo, the atheist.
I
and
know
we were talking,
Joe.
Okay,
Okay, go
that's
ahead.
crazy. And it was getting hot and heated, and eventually I told him that, hell is eternal separation from God,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's bad, and you don't want that. And he said, well, great, sign me up. I'm perfectly happy in my life without God. I'm satisfied, I'm happy. Hell doesn't sound so bad because I'm already separated from God. And he was like, boom, checkmate. I had no idea what to do. And he kind of has a point, like he's living a life without God, so why is hell so bad?
Well, because hell isn't a place anyone wants to go. While you're separated from God, you're missing all of the love and goodness that comes from God. And you're not down there with your buddies hanging out. Hey, we're in hell hanging out. No, you're going to be separated. You're going to be alone. And there's going to be a certain amount of punishment called torment applied because that's what justice demands. But you're not going to want the alternative either. If you don't want Jesus, you want to be separated from him, you're going to be separated from him because God will not force himself on anyone.
So are you saying that all love comes from God? Is that
Yes, God is the standard of love, and there's not going to be any love in hell.
even when, like, you've never interacted with God before and you've experienced love?
Yes, because that's
Love.
called common grace, though, Josh. His rain falls on the just and the unjust. God's grace goes out to everyone. And people who are not Christians can experience goodness in life. They can experience love. They can experience hope. They can experience plans for a future. They can experience all that. But I want you to imagine a place where there is no love, where there are no relationships, where there is no hope. There's just stone, cold, narcissistic self-absorption. That is Washington.
That's California.
No, that is hell. You're separated from the ultimate source of goodness and justice by your own choice, goodness and love by your own choice, and all you're getting is justice in hell.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you, Josh. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Jacob.
Jacob, go ahead.
So I just want to say I'm a STEM student here at IUPUI. I've been interested in apologetics for a very long time. It's actually what got me interested in science in the first place. Back in 7th grade. And, in high school, it was easy to have conversations. Like, if the teacher makes a claim about, evolution, if the teacher makes a claim about evolution in high school, it was easy to address that and, speak up and say something. But as I've gone into college, it's gotten more difficult, and especially as, the lecture sizes have increased, it's harder to speak out. There's more of a marginalizing feeling to it. I have to imagine it's much of the same within the academic community itself. What do you think could be done to address that and to get more, scientists comfortable with, at the very least, espousing a view in intelligent design and not feeling like they're not part of the conversation if they do espouse that view?
One thing you can do is get the book Tactics by my friend Greg Koukl, K-O-U-K-L. He has a section in there on what to do with a hostile professor and you're a Christian. What you never want to do is make using a war analogy here, a frontal attack on a superior force. okay? You don't want to attack the professor because he is older, more experienced, and he controls the microphone. He can shut you down at any minute. What you want to do is ask questions. Questions about why he believes what he believes. And some of the questions that Greg Kokel will say to ask are questions like, sir, what do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? In other words, what evidence is there for that position? And if, suppose someone says, well, life came here by natural processes without any intelligent intervention. Your question might be, first of all, what do you mean by that? Are you saying that life originated or subsequent life originated? The origin of life or subsequent life? What are you saying? You're saying origin of life got here without any... What evidence do you have for that? Because you know what the evidence is for that? Zero. In fact, it's going in the other direction. Right. You listen to James Torr down there in Rice University, who is just a total bulldog. He's a nanoscientist, and he'll just stand up and say, nobody in the world knows how non-life can come, or life can come from non-life without intelligence. Nobody. It's way too complicated. I mean, is it possible? I assume it's possible, but nothing. There's no natural process that we see that could do that. And yet people just say it happened. It's just bluster. So you can just ask them, what evidence do you have for that?
Right, and it's self-defeating too, because in the same day, this was this year, the same day that my professor talked about the laws of biogenesis from, that Louis Pasteur mentioned, or that he talked about, he mentioned that life came from non-life, and he said evolutionary processes brought us to where we are today. So it's like, it's so
you got to ask him for evidence. But then if he were to say to you, oh, are you one of those Christians? Why don't you get up and tell us how life began? What evidence do you have for that? What you need to say at that point, don't take the bait. Say, sir, what my views aren't important. I'm here to learn from you. I just want to see what your views are and why you hold them. What evidence do you have for that position?
Right.
And you know what's going to happen? When he's unable to give you evidence, he may just change the subject and move on. But after you walk out that door, some of your buddies are going to go, yeah, that was a good question. He really didn't answer it, did he? In other words, you can place seeds of doubt about what the professor's saying if he has no evidence for his position just by asking questions.
And on that note, you mentioned that people are without excuse, and deep down, there's that evidence. They know there is a God. So when you're going to, if you're evangelizing someone, do you think it's more effective to go right into that apologetics, or to say the plan of salvation, or mention the Bible and Bible verses and that?
In what context now?
Like if you're evangelizing someone, if you're just one of your friends, do you think it'd be better to just go the apologetics route first, or?
I would ask them, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Okay.
Or if you want to take Christianity out of it, because they may have a negative connotation of Christianity, you could say, if Jesus really died and rose again to prove he was God, would you follow him? And see what they say. Because if the answer is no, it doesn't matter how much evidence you give them. You're just going to annoy them. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I have one last question. Yeah. I know you have old Earth creationist beliefs. Do you believe there is any theological ramifications for uncoupling death from the direct sin of Adam?
No, because I think young earthers have misread have misread Romans 5:12. Romans 5:12 does not say that death came to all creation through Adam's sin. It says death came to all men through Adam's sin.
Okay.
So there could have been death. If the universe is old, there was death before Adam ever showed up. Remember, there was also a fall before the fall of Satan, which isn't spoken much about in the Bible, as you know.
Right.
So there could have been animal death long before Adam showed up. Remember, Paul's talking about human death and human salvation in Romans 5. He's not talking about how do we save llamas, right? He's talking about how we save men, because there was a first Adam and a second Adam. And the first Adam brought death to all men. The second Adam brings life to all men who will accept it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Good questions. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
My name is Frida.
Frida, go ahead.
My question is, I have two questions. The first one is, this happened on an Instagram, which I wouldn't say he's a believer, but he doesn't seem like a non-believer either. So the question was, it was about religion and how us learning about the Bible makes us follow Jesus and claim that we are Christians. And then this person said something like, so if he comes out and just starts a religion, is everyone going to follow him because one man died and men wrote the Bible and we all started following this religion called Christianity and believe that Jesus died on the cross? So I'm putting this question out to you. If one man wakes up like, let's say for instance, you just be like, I have founded a new religion called Frank's religion. Would everyone follow your religion?
Not everybody follows any religion, right? I mean, there are many people that in Christ's day didn't follow Christianity. But there are many that were, quite obviously, including Pharisee priests. If you look at Acts chapter 6, Luke says, and many priests became obedient to the faith. In fact, then when you get to Acts 15, which is the first church council, the people that bring the question, do we have to obey the Old Testament laws, are believers from the party of the Pharisees. So I think there's a lot more evidence than somebody just claims this is my religion, because as I mentioned earlier, Jesus was someone no one was expecting. A guy that claimed to be God and rose from the dead in the middle of time, he's not what they were looking for. And they went from being scared, scattered, and skeptical to suddenly they're transformed. They're actually going to their death saying, I saw him alive. None of them ever recanted. That's pretty good evidence.
And my second question is, it's also with another person. He said something like, he grew up in a Christian home, but due to an incident, he has deviated from going to church, being a Christian, to just being in the house, but he believes in God. His issue is with the religion Christianity. His issue is with the people that go to church. And he asked me this, what makes me go to church? Is it because I am going to church, or I'm going to church for Christ, for God? And I told him that I can't just wake up one day and be like, I'm not going to go to church, or I'm not going to believe in God because he has done so much for me. His issue was, he had an incident whereby his friends hurt his hand. And what was God in all this situation? Because the people that hurt him were also Christians. They went to church, they believed in God, but they hurt him. And he believed God exists, but Christianity, what is Christianity?
Well, it's not Christians, it's Jesus. That's the question we asked before. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven. When somebody plays Jesus poorly, you don't blame Jesus, right? And I guess the question I might ask your friend, does the Bible or Christianity anywhere promise that a Christian is never going to get hurt or die? Of course not. In fact, Jesus and the apostles were brutalized for claiming to be Christians. They gave their lives, and before he died, obviously, Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And he said, if they hated me, they're going to hate you. And Paul said, anyone who lives a faithful life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Persecution were promised, not health and wealth. So he might be believing in a kind of Christian God that doesn't really exist. Ultimately, we'll have health and wealth when we get to the new heaven and new earth. But right now, we're in a fallen world. And we're here to make a decision and bring as many people with us and to grow more and more like Jesus. That's why we're here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi, Bobby.
Bobby, go ahead.
Ratio Christie.
Yes, sir. Good.
So, I'm sure my questions has been asked to you like hundreds of times, but well, I forgot the answer, so I'm gonna ask again. So I'm thinking about this YouTube clip I saw. It's kind of famous. It's about Dawkins on a panel with a bunch of religious people, and they're talking about Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. and they're talking about how it was done so that our sins could be forgiven. And Dawkins says, why not just forgive us? Like, why do you have to kill your own son to forgive us? Like, what? And then everyone says, well, you believe in forgiveness without like reconciliation or something, which, okay, well, that makes sense. But then, so here's my question. If you need punishment, if punishment is necessary, it doesn't really make sense to me to punish someone else for something that I did wrong. You know what I mean? Like the idea of justice or of fairness. Like maybe
you're right.
It's
not fair at all. But Jesus wasn't forced to the cross. He volunteered to go to the cross. It would have been unjust for God to force Jesus on the cross as a sacrifice. But since Jesus said, Father, is there any way you can take this cup from me? If not, not my will, but your will. And there is no other way. So he went to the cross voluntarily as our sacrifice. But when you think about this, when some wrong is done, someone has to pay. Let's suppose I borrow your car and I smack up your car and you go, I forgive you. Okay, you forgive me, but you still got to pay for the car then, right?
You, not someone
Well,
else.
see, now you're asking, now you want justice, right? Right? But somebody has to pay because somebody's out the car, right? I could pay for it or you could pay for it, but somebody has to pay. If we just say, I forgive you, there's still a debt that's owed. And when it comes to an infinitely just being, God, he's not infinitely just if he allows unjust creatures to go unpunished.
So he is forgiving everyone, but he still just wants it to be paid.
Well, since he's the standard of justice, he has to have it paid. Otherwise, he's unjust. See, that's the whole point. So how does he pay it? He pays it. He doesn't ask us to pay it. He pays it. That's the unique thing about Christianity. You don't make your way to God. You don't put yourself in God's debt. He comes to earth and takes your punishment on himself. He's our substitute. Much more than our example. Yes, Jesus is our example, but he's more our substitute. He takes the punishment on himself because that's what justice demands. Does that make sense? All right, thanks, Bobby. All right, 2 more. Wait, you guys can't stay for 4 hours? What's going on? Come on. No, sorry, go ahead. Final 2 questions. Yes, go ahead. What's your name?
My name is Joshua.
Joshua, go ahead. You're third Josh here. Joshua's wild.
Yep. So this is more of an apologetics question.
Okay.
So it's like we've all seen clips, and you've obviously done it where you're on stage and people question you. They put you on the podium, and they're like, they want answers right now. How do you train yourself, or what are strategies used to fire back? Well, not really fire back, but, have the answers ready. Because I'm not a slow thinker, but, like, if someone asks me a question, I won't have the answer right now, but in, like, a week, I'll have, like, a 5-page paper for you. So,
well, I guess, look, when I first started doing this, I went to seminary in 1993. That's 30 years ago. And I started traveling with Dr. Geisler probably about 1996. And he and I traveled together probably for 5 or 6 years. We used to go around doing a seminar called The 12 Points That Show Christianity's True, which turned into the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And when you have a mentor, I remember standing on stage with him and someone would come up and ask a question and I'd go, I'm glad he's here. I got no idea how to answer that, right? But if you do this long enough, you're going to get the same questions over and over again. Every once in a while, there's going to be a wild one coming in there, but usually you get the same question over and over again. So you're never going to get good at anything unless you make an effort over a long period of time to get good at it. Nothing happens just immediately, right?
Practice.
Yeah, you got to practice a lot, and you got to think, how can I answer a question like this in a short period of time? Most of the answers I give are not complete answers. They can't be. You got 2 or 3 minutes, right? All you can do is just kind of give a doorway to an answer, as John Lennox would say. So when you do this long enough, I mean, I've got slides here for common questions. In fact, I could have put one up earlier about the Canaanites, but it would take too long, so I just kind of went off the top of my head. Okay, here are some things to consider with the Canaanites, right? But if you do this long enough, eventually it'll become almost second nature to you, just like anything. I mean, everyone has different gifts to do different things. I mean, you can do some things that I couldn't even get close to doing, and vice versa, right? We all have different gifts and different talents. And so it just takes a lot of time and a lot of practice, and you'll get similar questions over and over again, and you'll be able to do it.
Thank you.
If you study long enough. All right? All right, thanks, Josh. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
Hello, Dr. Turek. My name is Geneva.
Say again?
My name is Geneva.
Geneva, go ahead.
So I've watched you for a long time. I've heard most of the stuff you had to say in your presentation and stuff, but I've heard a lot of new things when you've been answering questions. So I've got a couple things to ask. First thing is about, like, you have the moral argument for we have the law written in our hearts. Well, where does this law come from? It comes from God. It's written, like, it's a standard above ourselves. Well, how is it that the standards are what they are? How is that how God is? And, like, how is it the Christian God and not some other God? Like, are we just lucky that the creator of the universe, just happened to believe that murder is wrong and adultery is wrong and all that stuff?
Yeah, okay. Basically, you're asking the question, is God's nature arbitrary or is it essential? And Christians believe that God's nature is essential, that he couldn't be any other way. He is the standard of goodness, the standard of justice, the standard of righteousness. He is the standard. Now, you may have heard some people talk about a so-called dilemma called the Euthyphro dilemma. I don't know if you've heard this. It comes out of a Plato dialogue where Plato asks the question, or the characters in the Plato dialogue say, does God do it because it's good? In other words, God looks up at a standard and goes, oh, that's good? Okay, I'll do that. Or is it good because God does it? In other words, he just arbitrarily says, well, today murder is bad and love is good. But he may change that another time, right? He's just arbitrary. In that case, then why do you need God? God's just arbitrary. Why don't we just make up our own morality, right? And if God has to look up to a standard beyond him, then you still don't need God. Either way, God's irrelevant according to this so-called Euthyphro dilemma. The problem with the dilemma, it's not a true dilemma. A true dilemma is A or non-A. Those are your only choices. In this, there's a third option. This is A or B. Maybe there's a third option, C. There is. God doesn't look at a standard beyond him and go, oh, that's good, I'll do it. If that were the case, this being wouldn't be God, that being would be God. And God isn't arbitrary. He just doesn't make stuff up and go, well, today murder is bad and tomorrow it might be good. No, God is the standard. There's not a standard beyond him, and he's not arbitrary. He is the standard. See, the buck has to stop somewhere. It stops with God's nature. So you can't get beyond that. You can't say, well, why does God exist? God just does exist. He's the self-existent, eternal one who is just, who is loving, who is righteous, who is all-knowing. He is that being, that perfect being.
So he just is.
He just is. That's why, what happens when Jesus says to the Pharisees in John 8, before Abraham was born, I am? What happens? What do? They picked up stones to stone him. Why? Because who's he claiming to be?
God.
He's claiming to be Yahweh. This is a quote from Exodus 3:14, the burning bush. Do you remember when God appeared to Charlton Heston? You remember that? You didn't see the Ten Commandments? Moses says to God, who should I tell the Israelites you are? And God says, tell them I am sends you. What does I am mean? The self-existent eternal one. The being that had no beginning, the being that will have no end, the being that just bees. That's the great I am.
And since he is and always has been and is consistent, right? His standards, who he is, doesn't change. But people might argue that the God of the Old Testament seems like he's evil for killing all these people. And someone asked you about that, and you gave some, the people have been doing wrong things for a long time, and this is God finally enacting justice. And he asked about the kids, there might be the age of accountability or whatever, and you were making an argument for actually killing the kids because what if they didn't kill them, they'd be adopted by the Israelites and then grow up and then might become murderers themselves?
I'm speculating as to why God said they all had to die, if in fact that's what the passage means. As I said earlier, Paul Copan says that's just exaggerated language, right? But if it truly means kill everyone, God certainly has the right to kill anyone at any time. He's God. He can resurrect us. And if Christianity is true, people don't die, they just change location, right? They go from this life to the next life.
Why can't you use that logic for a murderer, though?
Because we're not God.
Didn't give life, you don't have the right to take it.
No, we're not the creator of life, and we can't resurrect life. God certainly can. So, and when God kills somebody in the Old Testament, these are all judgment. This isn't, they didn't do anything and then God kills them, okay? These are all judgment. And the reason you tend to see more judgment in the Old Testament rather than the New, well, first of all, I would say you do see plenty of judgment in the New. Mm-hmm. I mean, hell is really introduced in the New, but let's look at the Old for a second. How many years does the Old Testament cover? Thousands of years. There's a lot of time to mess up. How much time does the New Testament cover? About 62 years.
But you think
there's not as much time. What's that?
But you think there's more judgment in the New Testament?
No, I'm saying there is judgment in the New Testament, but the reason you see more judgment in the Old Testament is because God's tracing the bloodline of the Messiah for thousands of years. Let's just say from Abraham to Jesus is 2,000 years, right? And before Abraham, we don't know how far back Noah was. There's all sorts of judgments because there's a lot of time for people, sinners like me and you, to mess up over that time and to therefore be judged. There's not a lot of time in the New Testament. It goes from Jesus' birth basically to 62 AD when Paul is in house arrest in Rome in the book of Acts. And then it talks about a future period, of course, in Revelation, where there will be judgment, right?
And you said something about people like being in hell and being in heaven if you're in hell, who says you don't keep sinning. Well,
yeah.
Who's to say you don't keep sinning in heaven, too?
Well, because, first of all, you won't have the sin nature anymore.
Yeah, but if you don't have a sin nature, why would you sin in hell?
You do have a sin nature in hell.
When does it get taken away?
Well, ultimately, it gets taken away when we die. We are continually, as Christians, trying through the Spirit to become more and more like Jesus, but we never quite get here because we still have a sin nature. But when we get to heaven, we won't have that sin nature anymore.
So
we'll be in a glorified state.
You're saying we only lose the sin nature when we go to heaven?
Yes, ultimately.
Not when we go to hell?
No, you still have it because you're not redeemed.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
I had a few other things. I can't think of them right now. Oh, when you're talking about like theistic evolution, you said only like maybe the animals were dying, man wasn't dying. Do you believe that like man evolved?
No. I wasn't talking about theistic evolution. The gentleman asked, is there a problem if you believe that the universe is old, that there was death before the fall of Adam? And my answer is no, there's no problem because Romans 5:12 does not say that death came to all creation through Adam. It says death came to all men through Adam.
But on that
so
point,
there could have been.
There a verse that says all creation groans in birth pains because of
That's
the fall?
Romans 8, where he's talking about the fact that yes, we do live in a fallen world, and we are degraded. We are being degraded, and we know this as we get older. That's when you get dresser disease. That's when your chest falls into your drawers, right? That's when you get to my age, 61, you go to bed, and then you wake up with pains you didn't have when you went to bed, and you know you're getting old when you get hurt sleeping, okay? Right? You guys all got that? You older folks in here? Okay. So we're running down. Yeah, we are. It's a fallen world.
So you're saying death came to man after sin. But
What's that?
Death came to man after sin.
After Adam's sin. That's what the scriptures say. It doesn't explain where animal sin, or animal death came from, I should say, but it explains where human death came from.
Well, the first animal death is supposedly recorded after they sin, where he gives them the...
If you're assuming a young earth.
Yes.
Okay. Well.
Wait, why does that determine whether or not there's animal death?
I'm not following you.
What does young earth have to do? Okay.
If the earth is old, as the evidence seems to show, there was many animals that died before Adam ever walk the earth.
Then why is there, in Revelation talks about like the lion being with the lamb living in harmony, as if them eating each other and dying and killing and stuff is part
Okay,
of the
well,
fall.
that's a metaphor for saying that
That's restoring stuff to how it was before, right?
well, it could be, sure. Or it's just pointing out that there's not going to be any death in heaven.
And would it be weird to look around and see all the animals dying and then expect yourself to not die? That doesn't make sense to me.
I wouldn't, first of all, who knows how long Adam and Eve were alive before they recognized, we don't have all this information. But I do know that Romans 5:12 does not say what many people think it says. One of the problems we have is we read a text and we assume it says something when it really doesn't say what we think it says. All right? All right, good questions. I got to go. All right, because I'm tired. All right, next week, thank you for all coming, for those of you that are still here. Is today Thursday? Today's Thursday, right? Next Thursday, we'll be at Ohio State, the Ohio State, but we're doing a different presentation. It's called How to Find Hope and Identity, and you can watch it streaming if you want, Columbus, Ohio. So thank you so much. Also, check out our website, crossexamine.org. There's that number again if you want the PowerPoint. If you want to give us a short survey, text the word event to that number. And thank you guys very much. See you next time.